Good afternoon. We'll call the meeting to order. This is the work session for Tuesday, February 16th, 2016 of the Marion City Council. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We'll start with the presentation.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. For those of you not familiar with who I am, I'm Lieutenant Mark Murda, in charge of the Patrol Division.
Speak up a little.
Sure. I'm in charge of the Patrol Division at the Police Department. I know this presentation is typically supposed to be about accident locations, problem locations that we have, but honestly I can say we do not have any problem accident locations. I look citywide at all the intersections in the software that I have access to, and most accidents that we've had at any one intersection is 9, and I'll get to that here. I also threw in some stuff about some enforcement activity that we do throughout the year as far as traffic enforcement. And this is our traffic safety grant that we're involved in, and we've been involved in since 1995. This is all overtime enforcement activity, which goes a long ways in keeping our accident rate down, in addition to our injury accidents down and fatalities. Since the inception of the program, we've got over $625,000 in overtime enforcement hours, or money that we've used for enforcement. Our grant is mainly focused on seatbelt speed and OWI violations. Those are the 3 things that we go out and try to hit especially hard. The officers go out at 4-hour blocks at a time and go out and do nothing but they're looking for seatbelt speed violations and that, because it goes a long way also to help keep our accident rate down. These are some numbers from 2014 to 2015 and some of the enforcement activity that we do. These are just some of the main violations that we have. So you can see speeding violations, moving violations, seat belts, child restraints, non-moving violations, which could be anything from window tint or expired registration on their vehicles, and total overall citations for the year. There is a reduction in that. Our grant was kind of slashed here, so we're not actually out there as many hours as we'd like to be with the overtime enforcement grant. So that's taken a toll on our overall numbers through the year. But as you can see at the bottom there, warnings, contrary to popular belief, our officers do give warnings. So over 2,600 warnings for last year alone. As far as our crash reports, these are from 2014 to 2015. Our personal injury accidents have gone up slightly. Property damage has gone down. We do basically reports on any type of accident that we get called to where there's any type of damage to the vehicle. We document everything. That also helps us evaluate if there's any issues with any specific location within the city limits itself. Non-reportables, those are basically if we show up to a scene, both parties agree that there is no damage to either one of their vehicles, that's the only time we don't do any reports. So you can see out of 750 total crash reports that we took, there's only 15 occurrences where we didn't document that. And unfortunately, last year, a young female lost her life. So we did have one fatality accident last year. These are the intersections that I picked out at one time. When I look citywide, I just took the number 5 and higher. So these are throughout the whole year, and those are the intersections. I kind of went from west to east. So you can see with those accident numbers alone, if you're thinking the whole year, that's really not a whole lot of accidents for those specific intersections. When you get down to Highway 151 and Highway 13, The implementation of that dedicated left turn arrow has really worked. Of all the 9 accidents that were there last year, none of them have to do with left turns. So that left turn dedicated arrow has really paid off. 7 of those at that intersection were rear end accidents, which you kind of look at it and go, rear end accident, 13 and 151. When I looked at it, that's basically anybody who's turning right, they're acting like they're going, and people think they're continuing to go. Well, they stop because traffic's not clear and they get rear-ended. So that's what that's all about. The 2 are the traffic control devices where people actually ran the light and caused a crash. So when you look at, like I said, when you look at that overall for the whole year, those are fairly low numbers. And everybody's always curious about roundabout crashes. When I looked at that for last year alone, we didn't have one single crash at either one of the roundabouts. I threw this in there because it's alcohol related. That's part of our enforcement activity. That's kind of hard to see. Sorry, I apologize for that. But last year for alcohol-related arrests for drunk driving offenses, we had 111 of those. And the average breath sample that we obtained from those drivers, the legal limit in Iowa was 0.08. And our average breath sample for those 111 people was over double that. So 0.173 of the far right-hand side column there. That is the average breath sample that. So these people are out driving, and we do our best to get them off the road. And one thing, we see zero tolerance there. That has to do with anybody 18, or actually under 18, because they cannot have more than, it basically comes out to about 1 drink in their system, and they're over the legal limit for their age. So last year we didn't come across anybody in that category, which, for as active as our officers are with that, that's really saying something about the youth today. They're kind of taking that to heart. So that's a great thing. That is just a quick overview of last year, though. I know there'll be some of the same material in our annual report. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
I have
Questions?
I had one. The fatality. What was the cause of that? Can you tell us?
I would say probably a cell phone or something along those lines. She was on the Highway 100, crossed over from eastbound into the westbound lanes, and was basically hit head-on.
But it wasn't in the city proper itself then?
It was in that area just west of 31st Street.
Okay.
We annexed some of that stuff in over the years, and so, yeah, our department handled that.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
I have a question. Somewhere in your reports, I'm thinking of comparable time. I'm thinking of the time you guys spend on domestic assault or an accident compared to, and how many of you reply or have to show up to some of those. I asked this question in light of the newspaper last week that took issue with overtime. And my feeling is, having been around a while, that you spend a whole lot more time when you go out to a domestic dispute than what we used to spend. I think a lot more time on accidents because I see more and more backup coming when you have particularly an out-of-state car stopped, it seems to me.
And it's all about officer safety for us. So on those type of calls, we're going to at least have 2 officers there. So you're tying up 2 officers. And the domestic violence laws have changed drastically from 20 years ago to today. Well, it's probably more than 20 years ago, but there's a lot of mandatory arrest situations that we come across where we do not have a choice. We need to arrest somebody because there is some sign of injury. So, and we also, if there's not, we have to ensure that both parties. If we don't have anything to arrest them on, we have to make sure that things are going to remain civil so we don't get called back there. And a lot of times we spend a lot of time. If a spouse has to gather some children, some clothes, whether they go to a relative's, a hotel, or a shelter, we spend a lot of time just making sure that there's not going to be any follow-up calls to that. So we do spend a great amount of time on domestic violence calls.
I asked that question when I looked at the number of speeding arrests being down somewhat. You guys are too busy to do them, maybe like you were in the past. Or have
That's
enough.
true. We do spend a lot more time on calls than we used to. They seem to be involving the more in-depth, more investigation that has to be done. We just don't show up and everything's fine and leave.
Right.
We always have to keep in the back of our mind that there's always something more to the picture than you may not get from a dispatcher saying, hey, you're going here for a domestic or you're going here for this. You always got to be thinking that there's something else that may be going on. And a lot of times there is, whether it's drug-related or other situations. So we get involved in a lot of things that aren't what they originally come out as you're dispatched as. It could be something totally different. And you end up spending a lot more time on those type of calls, getting to the bottom of things. We spend a lot of time standing by on calls, waiting for a search warrant to be drafted, things like that. So, if you got a lot of people involved in a call, it's going to tie up 2 or 3 officers, sometimes more. So.
Right, and it takes them off the street, so there you are, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
I just want to say thank you guys for the super job you're doing. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. We
Thank you.
appreciate it as well.
Good afternoon. My name is Corporal James Hancox. I've been with the PD for 16 and a half years now. I recently was given the opportunity to fill Claude Howard's position as the primary drug investigator for the city of Marion. And this is my report for the enforcement activity for the year 2015. The drug investigations occupies a great deal of our time as law enforcement, and we have dedicated a number of assets to it. Like I said, I am the primary investigator for drug offenses. However, the other investigators, they all do it. If I'm not available, or Corporal Howard, when he was with us, wasn't available, they'd pick up the slack. And all of the officers on the street are always doing what they need to do when they come across any type of controlled substance that's out there. We also have one officer that is dedicated to the DEA task force. I was fortunate enough to be a member of this task force for 4 years, and the primary job there is working complex drug conspiracies, which involve both not just the metro area, but the corridor and really the greater Midwest. Some of my cases took me to Chicago, Minnesota, and Minneapolis, and things like that. So anytime that we need an extra body for surveillance or anything like that, or additional resources, we always call on Officer Ward, who's assigned to that task force right now, to help with any local cases as well. We have 3 canines that are trained for the detection of controlled substances, and they're constantly out trying to do what they can to deter and keep this stuff off the streets. And then our DARE program, the school resource officer with Officer Dub here behind me, tries to help with the education and prevention process. And that goes into the ways that we go ahead and try to mitigate this problem through the prevention, the bike patrol, and the canines. I will be participating in the high school presentations going forward. But the education process with Officer Dobbs, the bike patrol, getting on our trails and recreational areas so that people know that we're out and about and help deter that behavior, because you never know when we're going to show up just riding our bikes and just try to be visible and deter things that way. The canine searches in problem areas, the apartment buildings, things like that, when appropriate, they will do searches and just kind of do some compliance checks, that kind of thing. The pseudoephedrine, the logs, all of the stores that sell Sudafed or whatever, they have to go through the log, and if there are issues, that we will get called, and if there's appearance of suspicious activity, we will address it and start an investigation. And interviewing people who are willing to talk to us and cooperate, whether they're witnesses, victims, or even suspects. That's an invaluable part of the process, getting people to talk. They reveal more than they think they do. And then obviously the active enforcement, we do informant purchases or even undercover purchases, search warrants, and consent searches is something we ask quite often and try to get in there and make sure that what we're being told is true. We try to fact check what's being said to us. Another thing that's helped us, I think, as a community is the implementation of this city code, which allows us to placard. Specifically, it pertains to all types of lab situations, which would be marijuana or even mushroom grow, which we have seen in the city. But meth-related lab materials and things like that is really what this has gone focused on. And this basically requires that, hey, if we found a meth lab anywhere in the city, whether it's in a single family home or an apartment building or any structure, the owner of that structure then is responsible to make sure it's cleaned up and notifying that it's been there, so that we don't have people coming into the community or taking over or buying the property, and it's just buyer beware. We're helping to make sure that they are doing what they need to do to make sure that it was cleaned up and the people are notified of it. This program instituted, I believe, in 2013, and since that time, you can see we've had 8 vehicles placarded and 13 properties. Most of those vehicles have been crushed. They're usually in cars that aren't worth $400 or $500, and the cleanup cost is into the thousands. So, over 2015, we had 3 vehicles placarded and then 7 properties. That was up from 2014, as you can see. This is just kind of a list of all the types of charges in which we will impose as law enforcement and send down to the county attorney for review, and we'll investigate PCS, possession of the controlled substance, possession with intent to deliver. That's having a substantial amount of controlled substance that is more than just a user quantity. Delivery is along those same lines. The tax stamp is for excessive amounts. The federal law requires that there be a tax stamp, and the possession of methamphetamine precursors. This includes, so you don't have to have the finished product, but when you start having all the components there, and we can substantially prove that those items are being used to manufacture methamphetamine, which is dangerous for many reasons, and we'll get into several of them here shortly. Pseudoephedrine purchase violations, I kind of touched on that very briefly. Drug paraphernalia, pipes, bongs, grinder, and just anything that's used to conceal, use, or manufacture controlled substances. Disorderly house is a common charge that we added with these, and it's a way we can help hold everybody that lives in those problem areas responsible. And then there are a few other charges there. One that's not listed here that we come across is also the prescription drug violations. We're seeing more of that, and we're starting to have to charge and investigate those types of issues as well. In 2015, the 22% of all the arrests, that includes suspensions all the way up to the major felony crimes, were drug related, whether that's possession of drug paraphernalia or one of the controlled substance violations that we discussed on the previous slide. There were 302 arrests for drug-related crimes in 2015, an increase of 20. And 25 of those, and then the adults were obviously the lion's share of it, and there was an increase of 25 arrests with the adults. But we did see a decline of 5 juveniles in charges, so hopefully that becomes a trend, and that will, that's obviously our goal. Primary the issue in the city in terms of controlled substance violations is marijuana. It is readily available. It was steadily increased, and with the legalization in Colorado, it's only one state away, and it just comes. It's more readily available and it's cheaper, and so we're seeing more of a rise on it. And the weights there, the gross weight, that's as seized, packaging included. We do not take the substances out unless it's going to go to court and actually get the drug weight and stuff. There's no reason to handle it, and if it's going to go, not going to go that far. So the weight you see there is as if we seized it. And the federal weights are not included, which means the task force, they may come across a large load, which has happened, hundreds of pounds, and that's not included in this either. The methamphetamine seizures, you'll see there at the top, there's a number of those incidents are confirmed. At the bottom, you see 51 other or not positively identified drug seizures. That includes substances we're reasonably confident that they are drug or meth related or something like that, but we don't know for certain. It's not been tested. So that's what those numbers you see. The methamphetamine is clearly the next problem on the horizon. Really is second only to marijuana in terms of the frequency in which we see it. In 2015, we, as a department, seized 59 guns. That's all types. That includes seizures for safekeeping, which could be a situation where a loved one had passed and they didn't know what to do with it, and we took it. Or there was a domestic situation involving a no-contact order being issued. State law requires that anybody who owns a firearm that has a no-contact order against them, they have to relinquish the custody of that gun until that matter is resolved, and we will take that if necessary to make sure that all the parties are being complied. But it also includes stolen weapons as well as ones that involve directly in an investigation of some sort. The cash there you see is down from last year. I'll cover that shortly. There were a total of 20 drug warrants served where that was the primary focus of that of the search warrant being written and executed, and that's out of 71 total warrants served during the course of the year. It is important to understand that in many of those, just skimming the data, more than half, we also seize drugs of some sort or paraphernalia during the course of executing those other search warrants. We always, included in our search warrants are obviously the drugs themselves and the paraphernalia, but also phone records, data. Many times we ask for a urinalysis. People are amazing oh, no, it wasn't me. I've never smoked it. And then next thing you know, you're lying. So that helps kind of weed out some of the credibility of potential witnesses. And we obviously will search vehicles and residences. We have now, over the last, I'm not sure when this was instituted, but 2 or 3 years ago, we have an officer dedicated to the forensic analysis and search of electronic data, phones, thumb drives, computers, things of that nature. People communicate on Facebook, text, take photos of themselves doing foolish things, and that's great evidence for us. It also is the number one way in which we can start to flesh out major drug conspiracies and draw a pattern of who they're communicating with and identify who's a user and who's an actual dealer. This is just an example of, and it's kind of small on the screen, I understand that, but what you see in the orange on the left-hand picture there, those are needles, and these are the types of concerns that we have when we do our search warrants. We don't go blindly grabbing for things because these needles have been used for any variety of things, and so these are the types of things we do come across fairly regularly. This is from a meth lab in an attic up on Lincoln Drive, I believe. And all of that, those are the items that are associated with a meth lab, what's called a one pot these days. And it's highly flammable. It's a highly dangerous situation, especially in a confined space. This is an attic. To speak to what Mr. Draper had said about overtime, whenever we get called for, especially a meth lab, we're now going to have 2 officers that are trained for the purpose of and know how to clean it up safely, and that is a process. It requires a great deal of equipment. It requires specialized training, and all of that requires a great deal of time and sometimes planning. And in order to get enough people up to snuff on the standards in which we have to adhere to, the training is an issue, and we have to make sure that we're maintaining our certifications and doing our job correctly and safely. Biological hazards that go with them, respiratory hazards, and everything else that goes with. When you're crawling around an attic with things that ignite if they come in contact with water, you kind of have to be paying attention to what you're doing. It also surveillance prep time. So if I'm called out, or any of the other investigators have to be called out to write a search warrant, it just takes time. We have to make sure that it's because it is a legal document that's being reviewed by a judge. We have to make sure it's correct. The K-9 officers, as well as the street corporals, are also helping now with search warrants to help cut down that time as best we can. But you can't just search a house alone, and it requires a team effort in order to do it safely, efficiently, and effectively. Occasionally we do come across situations that we are dealing with violent people, and our tactical team does get called out and asked to help. And then the process of handling evidence correctly, and a good example of one that I came across while at the task force, you conduct your warrant, it's a drug search warrant, and then all of a sudden you see something as disturbing as child pornography. Well, now we have to get a second warrant to make sure that we're handling that situation correctly. And that takes time, and there's no shortcut for doing it the right way. So sometimes they become long nights and days. The biological hazards, we often come across those needles will have blood in them. Obviously, that's an issue. When you start talking about respiratory hazards, anhydrous ammonia, which has kind of gone away to a certain extent because they use a different method, but there's still chemicals breathing that in confined spaces. Again, very dangerous. These are the three types of labs. I touched on it real briefly earlier. Methamphetamine labs are by far the most prevalent. Marijuana and mushroom labs. The marijuana grows. If you end up having mold and things like that, we got to make sure we're not exposing ourselves to things that's going to result in health problems. One pot method. That method is the predominant method that we're seeing. It's a shake and bake, but very briefly, what ends up happening is they put all their components together, they mix them together with Coleman fuel, camping fuel, highly flammable, and add lithium, which is, if it comes in contact with water, instantly ignites. And it burns at 1,400 degrees, and if that lithium is right next to the side of the bottle instantly fails and you have a fireball. And that ends up being the issues that the officers have to deal with that, have to make sure that doesn't happen. This is one of the largest labs we ever encountered, and that took quite a little bit of time to clean up properly. A lot of times what you're seeing is those types of chemicals. What you see is the Coleman fuel there in a backpack, and they're walking around with these things on their backs, and they could go at any time. These are the types of components that are being found inside there. There's the needles. It's just nasty stuff. There's an example of a marijuana grow that we had discovered. I believe that's from 2014. The clandestine lab, again, in order to make sure we're doing that safely, we're constantly trying to get training, get the most up-to-date information to know that, how do we do this safely. We have started participating in what's called the ACS container program, which has really been a great thing in the sense that we can now have a place to take this stuff in a very safe and deliberate manner that complies with EPA, DOT, and federal law. But it's something that takes time because we have to package it and do it according to DOT standards so that they can transport it safely. Where before we were having to wait 6, 7, 8, 10 hours for somebody to come from a cleanup crew in St. Louis. So this is an improvement. In 2015, we did see a decrease in synthetic usage. That's mainly primarily due to a DEA enforcement effort, Operation Synergy, where it was targeted specifically synthetic drugs. Marijuana continues to rise, like I said, due to the proximity of Colorado. And the meth lab continues to be an issue because it's easily concealed and it's extremely likely to cause a fire. And that's an example of one we believe was caused by one pot just a week ago today. Prescription medication abuse, this is the precursor to the heroin issue that we are seeing. And that was the primary thing I investigated over the course of the 4 years was the heroin issue. We are working together. I'm working actively with the canines and trying to figure out where's our problem areas, how can we focus our efforts to decrease those issues that are there. Money and firearms seizures are, like it says here, fluid from year to year. The seizures the cash seizures did go down, due in part probably to a change in the federal seizure policy, and also now you're seeing a methodology change with our drug dealers, which they're going away from bulk cash shipments and using green dot cards that they buy at the CVS or Walmart. And that is the conclusion of my presentation. Is there any questions?
Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah. I was just wondering, how does Marion's drug-related arrests compare to other cities in Iowa?
I actually don't have the specific data. I can relate it directly to Cedar Rapids. Having worked with the task force, I work directly with the narcotics unit at Cedar Rapids. Cedar Rapids narcotics unit is comprised of 4 or 5 full-time guys doing basically what I do, only there's 5 of them. And I'd say we're probably a little bit on the lower side of seeing like some of the we obviously don't see some of the shootings and things like that you see Cedar Rapids involved in. And trying to get somebody to come and actually do a deal in Marion is kind of difficult. They don't want to come to our community due to our reputation as a law enforcement. I'm going to plug ourselves here for just a minute. I'm aware that some of the criminals like to stay in Marion because they feel safer because of us as well, as odd as that may seem. But I did do a couple of undercover buys myself, and they won't come into Marion to do them because they're not smart enough to put on their seatbelt and not get pulled over. I guess I don't know, but the long and the short of it is I think what you see is in the city of Marion is pretty representative of the society as a whole in terms of the number of people using and that sort of thing. I don't think we're significantly lower there, but we definitely are doing a good job deterring the violence that accompanies some of this stuff.
I got a couple of questions. What does a meth house look like? How would we, as a citizen, know to identify it?
Chances are you won't know it. In 5, 6, 7 years ago, you would have smelled anhydrous ammonia, the very strong odor of ammonia. is usually, or chemical smell usually is the best indicator that something's going on. But with this one pot method, like I said, a lot of what you see is those backpacks, and then they will literally throw them in a spot that's kind of out of the way, let the bottle do what it does. It cooks itself, and then go and pick it up. But it can happen about any. We find them in trash. Tubing is that kind of thing. But like I said, a strong chemical odor is probably the most likely indicator that something like that could be going on.
And then the other thing, you talked about the biohazards. Is there any sharing from your department to, say, the building inspector, fire department, of where if they go in and get a call to a home?
Yes, I think we've been getting better and better with that process. Like I said, I assumed this position a month ago, and so a lot of my drug experience has been actually outside of the city or kind of working alongside the officers or Claude, Corporal Howard. But while I returned to patrol for most of last year, we've called out the building department and building for a number of issues. So we are not hesitant to call upon any of the resources that we have available within the city, and I think that's going to continue. I think we all in agreement that that's the best interest for everybody.
Yeah. And then the other one is the no contact. Do the gun owners ever get those weapons back?
It's a temporary order. It's basically designed to let's make sure this situation is calm, and so that we don't have anybody acting violently in a heat of a moment sort of thing, and that the information that is being provided to law enforcement during the course of our investigation is accurate and is fair to everybody that's involved. Nobody wants to deprive people of their constitutional rights, but what it is kind of a short-term measure to ensure or to help ensure that a violent incident doesn't occur. Once that process is gone through, a judge gets to evaluate it. Many times, the judge may choose to dismiss the charge or drop the no contact order. At which time, the gun order will make contact and we return the weapons.
Okay. And again, thank you for your work.
Any other
questions?
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Used to be Corporal Howard. He's now the director of Mercy Hospital for security. He's no longer working.
Okay.
Said he moves up to be a director of Mercy Hospital. I said, I don't know if he moved up to me, but that's. I think Tom's going to do a quick thing.
Do I have to use the microphone, Beth? You're going to make me use the microphone. Okay. Good afternoon, Your Honor, members of the council. I am your DARE officer, Officer Tom Dobbs, or as my DARE students know me, Officer Tom. Now, I tell them It's much better to know me as Officer Tom than to mess up somewhere along the lines and know me as Officer Dobbs. You don't want that. You'd much rather know me as Officer Tom. But it's a good give and take relationship with the kids. So in my role as a DARE officer, if you remember Officer Tian from years ago, in 2012, I was assigned to replace him in the role of school resource officer and DARE instructor. Now, the school resource officer gig, yeah, I wanted that job. DARE, I didn't have DARE when I was a kid. DARE started in 1983 when I was in middle school, but it didn't get all the way to Iowa. It started in Los Angeles. So when I replaced Officer Tian, they said, yeah, you got to be a DARE instructor. I said, okay, fine, I'll be a DARE instructor. Little did I know how much fun it is putting on that pretend teacher's hat, walking into classrooms and seeing 5th and 6th graders look up at you and wonder, why is there a cop in our classroom? That's the first lesson. Lesson 1, it's a 10-lesson class, and this year, like last year, it'll be 28 classes between the Linn-Mar District, Marion Independent School District, and St. Joseph Catholic School. So it's about 643 kids last year. This school year will be just over 700. So each lesson, or each course, is 10 lessons long. So you figure 28 lessons, that's 280 times I'm teaching the class. I get to know the material frontwards and backwards, like real teachers. It's amazing. But to kind of give you a breakdown, DARE started in 1983 in Los Angeles to combat the problems they were having with kids making really, really bad choices, getting assaulted, injured, killed, arrested, whatever the case may be. Now, fast forward 33 years later, there's over 50,000 officers teaching DARE, not just across the U.S., but across the country. Now, as I tell my DARE students, there's no cop you're ever going to meet quite like this guy, and that's a good thing. But I enjoy the relationship I have with the kids. To give you an idea, lesson 1, we talk about being safe and responsible. Lesson 2, we talk about drugs and alcohol. Lesson 3 is consequences and risks. Good risks have good consequences. Bad risks, well, they're going to have bad consequences. Lesson 4, we talk about peer pressure and dealing effectively with peer pressure. There is good peer pressure. There's also bad peer pressure. Lesson 5, we talk about stress and dealing positively with stressful situations. Lesson 6, we talk about communication styles and how to confidently communicate. If someone asks you to do drugs, you tell them no and give them a reason or excuse. Lesson 7 is effective listening, making sure that you are paying attention when someone is talking to you. Lesson 8, unfortunately, we talk about bullying. Every time I teach a class, it's 5th grade at the Marion Independent School District's Vernon Middle School and also at St. Joseph Catholic School, and it's 6th grade in the Linn-Mar District. But every time I talk about the bullying lesson, there's a short video we show, and obviously it's bullying. And I always ask, now, class, do you know what that was? And unfortunately, every single student knows exactly what bullying is, which prompts me to say, now, someday, obviously it's not today, but maybe 3-4 years from now, there'll be a class that they won't know what that was. But unfortunately, the world they grow up in, everybody knows what bullying is, but I still try my best to reduce that. Lesson 9, we talk about being a good citizen. And then lesson 10 is about help network, who you can lean on if somebody wants you to do something bad. At that point, they graduate if they've satisfied all the requirements, and usually most times they do. And then, and only then, do they receive their DARE graduation gift. They receive a red DARE t-shirt, which is kind of nice because both the Marion Independent District and Linn-Mar District, they do have predominant red colors in their school themes. So I appreciate the opportunity to be a DARE officer. I like to think I have the best job in the PD. Now, Corporal Hancox might dispute that. He really likes his new role. But it's a job I really enjoy, and with council support, I plan on doing this for a very long time to come. Thank you, council. Are there any questions?
Questions?
I could make up a PowerPoint and last another 30 minutes, but no questions?
Don't dare ask a question.
I have one. So what do you do as the resource officer?
As a school resource officer, briefly, the City of Cedar Rapids, they have school resource officers at Kennedy, Wash, Jeff, Prairie, and Polk Alternative School. That officer works at the school all day long, and the school district supplements that officer's salary, so to speak. The sheriff's office, they have one officer that's the school resource officer, and he goes from building to building and then handles calls as well. Then there's the Marion way. We do it a little bit better, I like to think. I'm in charge of all of the schools, so about 8,000 students, 15 different buildings, but the administrators do a great job of the day-to-day stuff, so I'm not the Maytag repairman sitting in the office twiddling my thumb saying, hey, I can take that. You want me to get that one? Okay. I'm still here if you need me. So I would get bored if I was just sitting like at a Linn-Mar or a Marion or an FMI or a Echo Hill all day long. I bounce around as needed. The school officials will call me direct. Hey, we have a situation. Can you stop by sometime today or tomorrow? And I'll deal with it. I love the relationship that our department affords. It doesn't cost the schools anything. I'm available as needed 24 hours a day. If an issue comes up, they call me, we handle it, we move on. I like that role rather than being at one school and not knowing what's going on at the other schools. So it works well for us. Good question. Anything else? I close with my thank you to you, Council, for supporting the DARE program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, Tom really doesn't like his job, but I'll work on that.
He's not very enthusiastic.
And as a citizen, I always want to greet you as Officer Tom, not...
Everybody should.
Right. That goes for all of you.
Mark and... Really quick, that you wouldn't believe the information we get from these schools that they call Tom, that the rest of us don't know anything about, and we can, or all the problems that may come up, or something that's going to happen, Tom knows about it long before, and we get it squashed before it even comes up, only because they trust Tom. He's in the schools. It's an excellent program. It's one of the best things we do, and Tom does a lot for this agency.
Chief, this may not be totally related to what we've talked about here, but while you're here, is there anything you can report on the nicotine-free parks ordinance that went into effect last fall? How that's going? Anything to report on that?
On the smoking part?
Yeah.
We have not had any problems that I'm aware of. Have we, Lieutenant?
No, we have not.
They understand it, and of course, we always try to get people, you can't smoke and leave, and as long as people listen, there's not going to be a problem. But we tell them they have to get out of the park, and they say, I don't smoke anyway, well, that'll cause an issue. But most of the time, we give them warnings like anything else, and they leave, and we're not going to keep giving the same person warning after warning. Once we tell somebody, they're done. They don't get any more warnings. But we haven't had any issues. To my knowledge, I don't think we even had a citation yet.
Okay, it's good to know. Thank you.
I have a question for Harry.
That's
Have
what
you,
we don't want to really write citations.
Right.
the hiring for your dispatchers, I know you were down a dispatcher or two. Is that going okay?
Do the backgrounds, had to start over.
Oh, okay.
To have another.
So you've got one, and but you're down one still.
And I'm in the process of hiring 2 officers. I just hired one and went for the backgrounds on the other. Right now, the officer list is still good.
So will you replace Officer Howard then, or is that what this? That's one of them. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for your support.
Thank you all.
You guys leaving? You don't want to stay for the whole thing?
Pay overtime?
Please leave.
Lon, is there a presentation, another presentation, or is this it?
I didn't see Brandon, so I don't know if he
Okay.
forgot or what happened.
Okay. Finance.
Yes, Your Honor. As part of the implementation of the new software here in Marion, we came to you back in September, I think, of this last year, and asked to set up some new funds in our financial software. We took the hotel motel activity, which was in the general fund, and pulled it out and made it its own fund. We took the trust and agency accounts, which was its own fund, and split that into 4 different accounts. And then we took the tax increment financing fund and split that into 5 different funds. And this is really just a better account for these activities, revenues and expenditures as the year goes on. And now is the time to do it as we implement this new software. What we're doing today is we're asking to transfer the balances, the cash balances that relate to those funds over to the actual funds. We just started to go live in finance yesterday. As far as I know, it's going fairly well. But since we're going live, we need to transfer the balances just to get those funds up and running. So we're not changing the ending fund balance amounts other than just to move the dollars to the right funds that they relate to. So there should be a memo in your packet that kind of summarizes that in a little bit of detail.
Okay. Thank you. Questions?
Will you have to do this for every fund, though, or?
Well,
every fund needs to be transferring the balances into the new software.
Okay.
But what this resolution is doing is just transferring the money that maybe was all in general fund, we're transferring that hotel motel portion over to that related fund.
Well, we won't see 200 or 300 of these then.
Nope.
That's my question.
Yeah, these are.
This
new
is kind of
funds
a
that were
one-time
created.
deal.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, no questions? Thank you. Public service?
Okay, thank you. We'll start with number 3, highlighted under our agenda. This is the first reading of amendment to the proposed solid waste ordinance. Under the current ordinance, and as long as I can remember, the City of Marion collects residential generators within the City of Marion. That means we only collect garbage from residential customers. Since then, we've had a lot of discussions with our board whether or not we should look to revise this. Now, there's a number of reasons why we would. Our intention of revising this is not to go into business to compete against commercial haulers, but we have identified quite a few exceptions to where we should consider an amendment to the current ordinance. A lot of them are the civic events in the downtown. Technically, these are not residential customers. If we get like the Marion Arts Festival, Swamp Fox, the concerts in the park, typically we're up there collecting the solid waste. With that, also we have a lot of nonprofits within the City of Marion. I'll give you a good example, the Granger House. Before we did collect their solid waste, technically the board said, well, we really need to revise this to make it inclusive of these people. We're really not against collecting those nonprofit entities. We just have to define who they are and what the rate structure should be. With that, we have some schools we've had discussions with, whether or not we can provide that service, as well as there's a lot of group homes within the City of Marion. What this discussion really prompted us to look at was the Art and Alley project, as well as some other projects within the city to where public services could look at doing some more dumpster collections. This will allow with a little bit more control in these areas where you've had some significant municipal improvements. Obviously, you want to control the solid waste collections in those areas. You don't want a lot of private haulers going in and out, damaging the infrastructure. So the board has proposed a rate and a proposed amendment. That's the rate we are proposing. Compared to commercial rates, it's actually a very competitive rate. I know, like, for example, a 3-yard dumpster, that usually costs about $120 to $130 a month. And so that's the rates or the provisions we would like to propose. With that comes the additional services that you get with being a City of Marion customer. That includes yard waste collection, that includes our recycling services, yard waste facility use, things of that nature. So speaking with our board, they would like to go ahead and make the recommendation to amend the ordinance as it is.
It's done on a case-by-case basis?
Case-by-case basis. We don't want to do a blanket provision for the whole city. The reason why we want to do that is because we don't want to compete. We don't want to be a business. And so we want to look at specific people within the city to where it would be a community benefit, so to speak. We don't want to, again, compete against. Yeah, go ahead.
So the Public Services Board decides who they are?
That's the way they proposed it, correct.
And are there like objective criteria that they would apply to this?
Yep, that's what we're proposing. Yep.
Where are those? I mean, do we get to see those or not?
I can't provide those if you'd like. They're still in discussions with that. We've had 3. If we move forward with this, we're going to have 3 readings, and we're going to discuss this again with the board. Again, we don't want to be a blanket provision. We don't want to go into commercial collections for everyone. That's the purpose of having that in there. So I don't think the council wants to pass this and say all of a sudden, hey, public service, take over commercial collections within the entire City of Marion. I just think there has to be some type of fail stop. There has to be a board to oversee that.
Right.
That's how we put that together.
But there also has to be, a fair mechanism.
That's exactly
to
right.
make sure that it's objective. If it's being done on a case-by-case basis and
Right.
There's nothing wrong with identifying cases where you want to be able to do the collection, but as long as it applies fairly to everybody that is in that meets those criteria.
We totally agree.
It's not totally subjective.
Yep, that's where we want to go with this.
That's all I'm concerned about.
Yep. Totally agree.
So this rate, would that have previously shown up in like the hold harmless agreements or something?
No, before we had that, if you remember, the solid waste agency had a community, kind of a community benefit to us, or we always got a credit with the solid waste agency. And from that credit, we covered some of the costs for the downtown events that had a community impact or a positive community impact. So we used that. That has since expired. And so from now on, we really have to look at the rates that we charge those events. And so that has gone by the wayside.
Okay.
So are the criteria being developed, or are they?
The board, the first time we discussed this was at our last board meeting, which was last week. That was their concern, that we had objective criteria, that we move forward with this. They don't want to just pick and choose who gets it, who does not get it.
But they haven't been developed yet? Or
We have a list of ideas. We need to solidify it. Typically, this is what our board reviews. This is why they're there, is to review what services and whom we should provide them to.
Okay.
The advantage being that if you are a city-related activity,
Right.
that you will have your trash taken care of, and you're not going to have to worry about some other company coming in or maybe not showing.
Yep. And Your Honor, if you'd like to, I can give you a list of some of that criteria we're looking for. They can't enact anything if it's not, if it's not allowable for them to do that. So
I see.
Yeah, we need to bring this before the council to see if they're going to accept this, and from there we need to get that, put that together.
Okay. Okay.
But exactly your point, that was their concern as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Any questions?
I have one. Do we have equipment to do this?
Yeah, we do have a rear load refuse truck that we utilize right now. We will have to look at provisions to adopt, making some changes to that. It's a kick bar that we'll have to add on there, which is no big deal. We would like to do that anyways because we'd like to utilize more dumpster services with these events. Typically right now we use a big roll-off container that's too big. We might only get 2 or 3 bags of garbage in there, whereas a dumpster of that size would be more appropriate. So,
You could have a situation where you'd have, with this, 2 or 3 downtown businesses going together instead of what we're doing now. That'd be very helpful. I think you'd have a common place then for things. So,
yep.
Makes sense.
And if you'd like, Nick, I'll get that to you, what we've drafted. We just don't want to take any formal action on it until we had a discussion on it. So
Thanks.
Yep.
Other questions for Ryan?
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Chief?
Yes, Your Honor. Looks like I got 2 things started there. The first one, I'm going to get hold of Bob. I don't think Bob really understands our ordinance, how it is worded when it comes to noise. We have our issue with Harleys. Harleys make a lot of noise, and I think one of his problems is just idling. Well, the Harley is probably not going to be over just idling. It's when they get on it or if they take the baffle out. And so I need to, in order for us to know the baffle's out, we have to inspect the motorcycle to know that. And also, when you do a decimal check, you really got to do it from where the complaint's coming from. You can't bring it up to the motorcycle. You got to go from the yard. So if somebody's complaining over here at this house, you go to the corner and you hit wherever you're wanting to see if it's too loud. So I'll explain that to him. I'll give him a call and get him up to date. I know Harleys every year seem to be a problem in the city of Marion, and so we'll try to address them. I think most of it isn't. I think most of it's because they're taking the baffles out and make them so much louder than they need to be, and then it's defective muffler. So it's a whole different charge, but then they can't drive the motorcycle at that point either. So we'll take care of it. I just need to give him a call.
I know this has been an ongoing concern for him, so.
Yeah, it is, and he's not the only one. Every spring, somebody calls about the Harleys going by, and it could be 1 or 2 in the whole city going by and getting it on a little bit and causing, without the baffles, and causing some anguish, but we'll take care of it. But I need to call and make sure he understands what we need to do.
Okay, thank you.
And the second one, we have the same problem as every police department who is getting body cams. These body cams take up enormous amount of space. Joe, you can come anytime you want to, but they, Actually, I was sitting in my office, and then all of a sudden, Terrell gives me a call, and so does Shalene, and then Marco, Dan, said, you need to come in here, we got some issues, and come to find out, our server doesn't have near enough space, because we have the body cams, and we also have the car cams, car videos. And when you got 45 officers with body cams, and they have to download after 8-hour shift, they have to download that, goes on the server, so we're going to have a server just for that, and we're getting a server that's 44 usable terabytes. 44 terabytes. That's a lot of space. Plus, this server can go up to 70 terabyte, from my understanding, for usable space. Unfortunately for me, we didn't realize it was going to be this big an issue, so I did not have this budgeted for. But also fortunate for me, I have what we call asset forfeiture for non-budget items. So I got with the city manager and said I can take it out of asset forfeiture because it's almost a $20,000 item for this server to do this. And this is just, trying to get up to 6 months of data on these servers. So
Is that how long we keep the data?
well, there's no set time on that. That's a policy thing with each agency, but there's no one that says you have to do it this long. So we're going to download all of them, and then we're going to make that decision, and then if it's not needed, we're going to get rid of it. Some of it we already know when we have the body cams that we need to keep it longer, and then we'll, take that and hold that longer than we will the rest of them. But it won't take long with 45 people, 24 hours a day to get to 44 terabytes. Plus, then like I say, you add the car cameras onto it also. So this is just something, like I said, it comes out of asset forfeiture. It's really not affecting the general fund at all, the city, because it's something that the city really doesn't have any control over. It's asset forfeiture from drugs that I have the extra money in there that we're going to buy it for. The only thing that will in the future, in about 3 to 5 years, we'll probably have to replace it, and then naturally it'll come on the replacement plan.
Okay. Questions for the chief? None? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike.
Good afternoon. First item that we have started on the agenda is kind of cleaning up a deed issue that arose this past year. We offered several utility easements to ITC, and we worked on some with Alliant Energy in this area. This would be the Krumholtz property through here, Grand Avenue coming down, and then here's our trail that runs from Grand Avenue down along the side of Menards. So what we discovered when we were going through the process with allowing the utility easements was that this property in here, which is about 2.7 acres that we originally thought was deeded to the city, still was under the control of Interstate Power and Light. So through the process, working with Alliant Energy, what we've come up with is that they would quit claim deed this 2.7 acres back to the city, put it back under our control because we have all the improvements through here with the trail system. Working with them, they thought that would be the best solution versus providing us with an easement. We take it over, and then that kind of segues into number 3, which is basically with us taking, over the property, then we would provide Interstate Power and Light with a utility easement for about 435 feet in this area that's highlighted. There are some existing lines there now. They have a power line that comes down on the backside of Menards here, kind of jogs over, and then they were provided an overhang easement where they hang on ITC lines that run across the backside of the development here. So what that kind of What that would look like then is that basically here's their existing lines, that covers that utility easement that we would be providing to them. So number 2 is that we're accepting that property, and then number 3 is we have to set a public hearing when we provide a utility easement. So those are what 2 and 3 consist of. Any questions on those?
Questions for Mike? Straightforward.
The first thing you talked about, Mike, that doesn't, that didn't affect the trail. I mean,
No, not at all, which is kind of what we were after, because we had all those improvements for the trail there. And then to find out that we actually had built a trail over property that rightly the city didn't own. So it was something that we've been working on this past year to try and get cleaned up. So
it's not like you discovered we didn't own the trail or something like that.
It surprised everybody. It was just one of those things that was just kind of an oversight within that, when there was a lot of exchange of properties and things, and everybody thought we were doing the right things and just kind of got a little messed
So this
up
is
in
just
there, but we'll get
putting
it all
into effect
straightened
what
out.
was intended initially anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And then number 4, as at the last council meeting, I went over, did a presentation regarding the Lau Park Development Project, and tonight under engineering we'll be setting the project calendar for that. And I broke down the funding on that. One of the items in there was $280,000 of a lost allocation that currently, it's in the current fiscal year budget under the lost allocations to go towards a pavilion in Thomas Park, basically a replacement for what was called the Brown Pavilion that's set up on the hill in Legion Park. At the December Park Board meeting, we discussed the projects, the Lau Park project, the Pavilion project, and it was the recommendation at that time in December of the Park Board that we would reallocate those funds for the pavilion to go towards the Lau Park Development Project. It was the opinion of the Park Board that the Lau Park Development Project right now is the priority project within the park system. So I wanted to get that on the agenda. There's a Lost Advisory Committee meeting tomorrow afternoon. They have not met for a couple months, so we're kind of have a condensed time frame here that we're working with. So tomorrow afternoon, I will go to the Lost Advisory Committee, explain to them what I just talked to the council about this afternoon, and then get the recommendation from the advisory committee that it meets the ballot language, and then that item would be on Thursday night's agenda for approval by council if the advisory committee aligns with that, what we're trying to do to help with the funding of the overall Lau Park project.
Okay. Questions on that, Mike?
Yeah, I wish that you would not remove the pavilion at Thomas Park and replace it into I think Lau Park is becoming too civilized, and that was not the intent of Lau Park.
Maybe you can clarify, that it's being reallocated, but not for a pavilion, correct?
Well, the funds that are being reallocated were called out when I developed and put together the second round of the local option sales tax spending plan, that 10-year plan. One of the items that we called out was to build out a new pavilion in Legion Park for a pavilion that we took down several years ago. So that would be reallocating those funds over to Lau Park. As far as, go ahead, Nick.
But at Lau Park, it's not going to be used for, your plan isn't to use the money for a pavilion at
No,
Lau Park.
that's correct. That's correct.
That's what I wanted to clarify for.
What are you going to
Councilman
be using
President.
the money for?
The money will be used for that overall development project, which consists of roadway development into the park, consists of parking lot development, consists of playground development, consists of trail development from the parking lots up to the amphitheater area, which are all items that are identified in the overall master plan for Lau Park.
I still think it's becoming too civilized. I mean, it was, it was supposed to be a meditative location where people could go and just meditate. And now, I mean, look at all the activities and everything that's going on, and it's just becoming too civilized.
It's still within that 2011 master plan for Lowell Park. It still provides for those very things that you're speaking to.
Well, I wasn't on in 2011, but I was on when George gave the land to the city. And what his intent is not what is being done now.
I agree to the point that the intent of the property was to be able to have a lot of that passive type of activity within it. Within that 2011 plan, we are still providing for those same things that George wanted to see happen within that park.
No soccer fields.
Again, the committee that put everything together, Katie Lau Lancaster was on that committee. Alice Lau has seen all this plan. She was part of the overall, she was up on the front end of everything associated with amphitheater development, so it is not like these are not things that meet the wishes of the Lau family.
Well, I just think in some cases that Alice and Katie were both overwhelmed, and it was beyond their comprehension as to what was going to actually be done.
I can only speak to the committees that I've been involved with, that they have both been exposed to, and they have always been supportive of those initiatives.
Well, I would still like to see the pavilion at Thomas Park, because that still is tremendously used. I mean, that's closer in, people will use that more than they will to.
And it is not coming out of the park board meeting where this was a discussion item. It was also within that meeting that we wanted that the park board staff to come back to that project. Now, we'll have to look at different funding sources associated with that, but it's not something that just goes off the radar. It's something that we'll have to come back and redevelop in the future.
All right, I'll hold you to that.
That's fine.
I would like to say I was on, and so was our mayor, on the amphitheater committee, and the Lau family was involved in that, and their support was there, and they've been pretty supportive of what has been brought to them for that land. So I think that there is a certain area, even at the amphitheater, for a meditation area. It's a pretty stately place. So we'll see.
And I've asked Katie about that, because we've had, when you came before with the master plan update, and there was some discussion about whether or not this is all what was intended with the gift, and I asked Katie specifically, and Katie said, my father would be very proud of what's going on. It's being used for public purposes. It's being used as a community asset. He didn't want to control exactly how it was used, and he would be very proud that it's being, he had very few restrictions, and that he would be very proud is what she said. So I don't know, maybe.
Well, as I recall, there were two restrictions. One was that there not be a road connecting 10th Street to Albernet Road.
I think that's correct.
And no soccer fields.
That was a restriction?
That was one of the things. He did not want soccer fields.
Should be all over town.
I remember that.
It was a non-soccer game.
Okay.
Mainly because I helped get the funding.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Engineering?
Thank you, Your Honor. We'll start with number 2 under engineering. As you're all aware, and should have been provided a copy of our engineering work program, draft work program. Hopefully you'll receive and file that, which will acknowledge your acceptance of that work program. We did prepare that. It has been put on the website. It also has on the back of it our actual work program as far as each individual inspections, how we're going to use that manpower that we're provided to do those projects all the way through next March. So we do one of these each year
Therefore, we know how our manpower is going to lay out, how we're going to be able to handle each project, how we're going to have that inspection ability to be there the utmost amount of time to provide for that quality inspection that we do. So, any questions on that? I'm not going to go through it. It's about 20 pages. We're trying to make it a little more comprehensive for you. It does have a little more look like my weekly newsletter, but we like that format, so we continue to use it.
Good
Questions
format.
at all? As we go through each of these projects through the year, like we will tonight, as we do a work program or a project calendar, you'll see those specifications as far as what the project is going to entail, how much it's going to cost, how long it's going to take to build it, and so forth. So, even though you have all of this now, you'll see each of these projects individually as we go through for proceeding to letting. So, as Mike has said previously, number 3 is the 2016 Lau Park parking lot project.
You're down 2. Can you go back to 2?
No, I want to go back to 1. On the agenda that I picked up Friday about the reimbursement to Mooney Angle Land Company for administrative fees. With the current thing about the state maybe pulling out the funding for Tower Terrace Road, what is our status on that?
Neither one has to do with the other, but the funding for Tower Terrace Road creates the ability. That's if you're talking about the interchange is separate from us in a lot of ways, in the sense that we really need to get traffic to C Avenue, not necessarily to 380. The IJR, which is the intersection report, is still in process only because it keeps changing as different things are added. They're talking about 380 going to 6 lanes, which then affects the ability to build that intersection, that interchange, and the cost of it. So they've stopped that report and pulled back in those fundings associated with that, which really didn't exist in the 5-year plan yet anyway, to restudy that and make sure that it benefits the interstate. So the interchange has to benefit the interstate to be able to be built.
Well, I know that we've been on top of getting Tower Terrace built, but the only thing is it going to ultimately end up as a road to nowhere?
No, it does not look that way. Like I said, it goes from C to Highway. We'll eventually go from C to Highway 13, which would highly benefit us as Marion. But also there is an overall impetus to get that completed, if not over to Centerpoint Road to 380. It also goes west of 380 into the west side of Hiawatha. So I can't really speak to the interchange because that's within the DOT and it's an ongoing study. You're looking at probably 5 years anyhow, whether anything is decided on that.
On Tower Terrace from Albernet Road west.
Well, sorry, Dan, are you referring to the article that was in the Gazette about
partially,
the piece?
but then also looking at those roundabouts, they're only taking care of like 2 lanes, and are they going to have to be expanded ultimately, or what?
Let's start first with the defunding. The defunding was $760,000 that was on the portion west of C, west of Council. That money is being reallocated actually to our portion between C and Albernet Road, so that money is going to help with the project. That area west of there is about $18 million, and with the bridge, the 2 bridges that go over the creek and the railroad, those dollars will eventually come through the region.
It's just that money was allocated, but they weren't ready to use it yet. So it was requested that it be defunded from that segment and allocated to a segment that's ready to be done, which is Marion's portion.
That was not clear.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I think that's where the confusion comes from. But so it's not that anything is that the DOT pulled any funding. It's just there was funding allocated to a particular segment. They're not ready to do it yet. We're asking that it be used for our segment, which we're ready to do.
But they haven't granted it yet.
Well, no, it hasn't been voted on yet.
It has to go through public input first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
I had a question.
Yes.
So the 8th Avenue project, the widening of 8th Avenue?
Yes.
Is that going to be, is that still scheduled at the same time as the roundabout at 7th and 7th?
We have not We are preparing the plans for that project, however, depending on how the roundabout goes. We will not start 8th Avenue if it conflicts with those traffic patterns.
So it
may
will
get
not
pushed.
start until 7th, the roundabout
May
start.
not start till 17.
Okay.
It may be that if, because traffic will be maintained in the roundabout, we may be able to build some of the widening sections or do some of the storm sewer work that would allow us to move that project forward maybe later in the year. We really wouldn't like to wait till 17, but we will if we have to, if it's going to be for a convenience for the traffic.
That was my concern.
Yeah, we have a couple projects that are dependent on other projects within our work program that just would not be a good idea to go forward with them because of the congestion that it will cause. So we'll deal with those as we come through, and that'll be a great question when that happens. So.
Okay, thank you.
So back to the Lau Park project. This project is estimated at about $850,000. We do have a street lighting project that will come back in later that we will let separately from this project. As you can see within this area, the new amphitheater is right here. And we're proposing, Mike is proposing, as he's reviewed with you previously, a trail from the amphitheater to the west over to this 100 lot parking lot, and then there's another 20 lot parking lot down here where next to the full access playground area. This is Irish Drive. This is the current trail that runs east to west within the park. We're proposing to extend this on up to over here where the existing maintenance building is, and then create a new parking lot. We would propose letting this project, I think it's February 20, March 8th. We would receive sealed bids at that time. Work would start no later than June 24th, and we would provide for 50 working days. We are also allowing for an alternate bid of concrete or asphalt with comparable structural number to see that we can get the best bid possible for the project.
Is it 100 or 200 parking spots in that? I'd heard 200. Someone had said 200 before.
It's 200.
200, okay.
192.
Okay.
Sorry.
And then why is the road continue past the
Well, eventually
parking?
it'll come up and serve these ball diamonds. We'll create an extension over to this area where there's probably another parking lot over there.
Yeah, where it stubs out there, in future projects, that road would continue up to the other side of the other two baseball fields, where you come in from the Oak Ridge side now. Up there would be another smaller parking lot to service both the football field side, the Pee Wee baseball field sides at some point in the future. When that would happen, at that time that roadway would develop up to that parking lot, the service road that services the maintenance building that's out there now would go away. That would convert over to a pedestrian trail that would go up and cross the pond dike. So going back to what Mary Lou was speaking to earlier about not having a through road from 10th Street to Elbernet Road, honoring George's will of what he wanted to see in Willow Park, we would never have a roadway that continued all the way through, even though it drops out in a parking lot at the school. We feel that would be a connection to Elbernet Road, and we would not want to do that.
So it will not connect into the parking lot of the school?
It would not connect into the parking lot at the school.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is there going to be lighting from the trail from the amphitheater out to the parking?
Yeah, we're proposing, I think, bollards along
Yes,
the
that's correct.
trail, and then we would street lighting similar to some of the other parks. I think it's similar to this up here. Would go around the parking lots.
We're seeing currently now a huge need for more parking up around the pavilion area. Why are we moving the parking so far away, and what is that distance to that trail?
From here to here. I did there. We're a blue zone. We'd like to see everybody.
I totally agree.
This partly, Only because this area is a good place for the parking lot. It doesn't intrude to the park, but it also is an area that is where it was planned to go. It is very advantageous location as far as uses. So.
And will that area south of that trail then still be tillable, or what will happen now with that divider?
This, I think that this blue line north will be tillable. The rest of it will be going back to prairie or something.
Yep, that's correct. Where the blue line is that Dan pointed out, everything to the north of that is still in row crop. We took about 28 acres out of production last fall, and that will all be developed associated with this project in prairie grasses. Just to, if I could, Dan, where the existing gardens are and garden plots now, right in that area. To the west of that, those will be developed into community gardens too. We actually are looking at increasing that by 30 this spring, and those are almost all sold out already. So we might even expand that a little bit more. So for the short term, that area will be prairie grasses, those type of things in there. And future associated with that overall master plan or future greenhouses, that type of thing in that area.
It's 1,400 feet is what that is, and I had the same questions of Mike too, and then I got the master plan of Lau Park. Basically, this parking lot's going to be the overflow parking for all the different facilities when the whole thing's built out. Right now, it seems to be in the middle of, not a whole lot, but when everything's built out in 20, 30 years, I don't know, this will be the spot for everything that you go to where you have trails going to different spots. So I would suggest getting the master plan, revised master plan, and it makes a little more sense when you look at that on the overall than just this little piece right now.
I think the master plan also calls for much more parking up here around the building as well, right, Mike?
Yeah, within the master plan and there was grass overflow parking in that area that could also be increased in the future and expand that parking area up there. And basically within that master plan, and when you look at, why is that parking lot, and Darren's right, when you look at the overall master plan, I wish I had that at the last council meeting. I wish I'd have brought it back with me today, but I apologize, I did not do that. When you look at that full build out, you need those jumping off points. There's also, it shows within that master plan, it also shows footpath trails going over to the school complexes that are there. So sharing some of those, like we do right now with the Oak Ridge School parking lots, they could also come in from that side to go to an event over there at their facility also. So that was kind of why we were trying to centralize that a little bit. We are always full on weekends with the ball complex out there at Lau. If there's ball games at the school, if we have tournaments going on down the field, we do not have enough parking for those areas either right now.
And I totally agree with you. And obviously, forgetting about the master plan that we had, obviously I had oversighted that because I attend many functions out there, and we got a lot of parking going up and down, off-street parking on that road now where there's people parking in the ditches and stuff. So there's a huge need to get the parking up around the facility there if we're going to continue to keep renting it out to large parties. So I was just curious. So thanks for that clarification.
Within the concept, that's what this area right here is. And I think Mike explained that this lake here probably will not exist. So this trail would come across from here, but it all ties into this big loop of trails and roads that goes to the north. Trying to balance 280 acres or whatever it is and put that parking in strategic areas. It just happens to be this is the one we're doing at this time.
And if I could point out with Dan with that plan up there now, you can still see as we build out the park based on the master plan, how much of that passive area still exists as you go to the north up in that area that is still in row crop ground right now, and that will always be trails, prairie grass, tree plantings, those meditation type of areas. That area is called out in the plan to be left that way, and that's what we plan on doing.
Other questions on this? Okay. That's it for parks. or for engineering?
No, I actually have a couple other things. So at the last meeting, I think it was the last meeting, you did approve our locations for our sidewalk assessment projects, which was on 27th Street, Grand Avenue, Barrington Parkway, and East Post Road. Within that process of working towards assessment of the adjacent property owners, we have to start with a preliminary project calendar. In most projects, we do a final, which is everything at one time, but because of the way the progress of notifications and so forth happen, we actually split the project calendar into 2 phases. Therefore, tonight we're asking you to approve the preliminary project calendar, which basically does a resolution of necessity saying that the project will go forward so that we can notify those residents and notify them of their preliminary assessments associated with the projects. So we are recommending the approval of that. The next item is another project as well that kind of came up late, kind of last minute, but it is within our funding for the year as far as stormwater management, stormwater sewer repairs. Basically, we're talking about the area between 8th and 6th Avenues west of 10th Street. We did receive a request to provide for better access to the storm sewer in this area. So we put together a project that would allow for the replacement of 2 existing brick manholes and the installation of 2 new manholes in these locations here, these 4 locations. It's kind of a small project, but it seems to be a very important project. It's about $45,000. We're moving forward with a project calendar tonight that would allow us to move it towards letting on March 10th, and we would start working no later than May 31st with 25 working days. It's a fairly small project. We should get actually quite a bit of interest anyhow just because of the work. We have a lot of contractors that do this work within this $50,000 and $100,000 range. So we look positively towards probably a reduction in that estimate when we get a final bid.
You're not increasing the size of the pipes or having to dig up any of the system. You're just allowing access so you maybe can clean it or something.
Yeah, it provides for Gary Williams to be able to work better within the storm sewers, to clean them and to access them. A lot of the old part of town does not have a lot of manholes. They built the storm sewers without manholes. So.
Okay, questions on this? Okay.
This would be included in our normal budget within our stormwater management fund. So.
Okay. Good.
Item number 7 is a TAC item that was requested a while back about unregulated intersections between 10th Street and Emerson School. We did look at the 16 intersections that we thought was probably involved in the request. She was not really specific about that. Of those 16 intersections, 5 of them were unregulated. Within that, we worked with Mark Murda at the police department, asked him about those accidents that were unregulated and how they handled the traffic that were there. Of those 5 intersections, 4 have had no accidents within the last 5 years. The other one that was there, 11th Avenue and 12th Street, has had 3 accidents over 3 years, all of them in December, so I'm guessing they might be ice related. We are, however, recommending at this time that we do install stop signs stopping east and westbound traffic on 11th Avenue at 12th Street. TAC was kind of mixed, you might say, on recommending this. However, I think we'll move forward unless council does not want us to. It's a fairly low volume intersection. Sometimes sticking stop signs in will create accidents because of the change in the environment. So I'll leave it up to you. We are recommending the stop signs, but I would say not real strongly. She has been notified, the requester. I don't know if she'll be here Thursday or not, but she was notified of the meeting.
What was that? We're at the 11th Street and
11th Street and 12th Avenue. 11th Avenue and 12th Street.
11th Avenue, 12th Street.
12th Street.
Let's see, here we go. So within this area, within our GIS, we keep track of all the stop signs and yield signs. This is 10th Street. So that's 12th Avenue, 11th Street, so it's this one right here. These are, the blue ones are the 5 unregulated intersections, and these are all regulated with stop signs in one direction. So we're proposing this intersection right here. I know that's hard to see at this elevation, but.
Have you heard any plans for the old Emerson School?
I have not heard anything specific. My understanding is that all the activity within that school will be moved to the new site out on
Longfellow.
east at Longfellow.
Yeah,
Yes.
but are they going to maintain the building or tear it down or?
Yeah, I've not. We meet with the Marion Independent staff, and they've still not made that decision. That may affect the situation there as well. There'll be probably less traffic there than there is now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
It's really not that close to the school. It's still a couple blocks away.
Yeah, but I think it is. I think it is school traffic, though, probably. The visibility is good there. The traffic, the speed is 25 mile an hour both directions. That's why we're kind of 3 accidents in 3 years does not, or in 5 years, does not really qualify as a warrant for stop signs. But these neighborhood intersections, sometimes you're just better off to put them in to just help with calming the traffic.
Any questions on that one? And you're going to be looking at 5th Street, 10th Avenue?
We actually already have. There was a report within my memo. There have not been any accidents there in 5 years.
Okay.
We do have, I didn't respond to it because we are not recommending any change. There is quite a bit cut through traffic there, but surprisingly there's not been any reported accidents there in 5 years. I think people probably do slide through that intersection a little bit in the wintertime, but once again, they're not reporting those accidents. If you build the Alburnett Bridge extension, we won't have to worry about that anymore.
Yep, that's true.
Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you. Planning?
The first item identified is the preliminary plat, Bedford Addition, corner of Echo Hill, and Alburnett Road. I want to make sure, yeah. We've talked about this. It was rezoned at the last meeting. This property identified in red just north of the most recent Skogman development here, west of Alburnett Road. This is Oak Park Estates, Echo Hill School. So as you go north on Alburnett, just before you take a right to go to Echo Hill, which people in the area normally do, and that you'd see Horse Farm, which is being developed, 52 lots on the south side of that property. On the agenda, you'll see that there's a preliminary plat to be approved, and then there's 2 plats of surveys. And the plats of surveys are really just to provide for the transfer of property. As you can see, the development bisects two pieces of property there. Once the preliminary plat's in place, then we can ensure that we subdivide the property for transfer consistent with that preliminary plat. I went through quite a bit of detail at this at the rezoning meeting, and I don't want to belabor the issue unless there's concerns from the council on going through all the details. I will say that we, as I had indicated before, this subdivision to the south has been very, they've kept a pretty close ear to the ground as it relates to development because they have a stormwater issue in that neighborhood. We did go ahead and notify them of the plat just so they know what's going on and they're just not driving down the street someday and they see bulldozers and wonder what's happening. So there may be some folks from that neighborhood that want to hear more about how the proposed development is going to drain. I will let the council know that as far as the plat goes, and this is the particulars of the plat, Alburnett Road being here, Echo Hill to the north, and you can see the development that's existing. It's currently under construction to the south. They're connected, And most of the water, and I would say from about here east, goes towards Alburnett Road. There is a small portion to the west that will go into the drainage way that will ultimately affect that subdivision, but they're doing everything that they're required to do by code, and ensuring that stormwater detention is being provided as you can see right here. So appropriate accommodations are being made. Really, the way that neighborhood was established, it was built directly in, see these two converging waterways, and then they go right here. It goes diagonally through that neighborhood. It was a county development developed, I don't recall when it was, but it had to be in the 60s or 70s. And it was the lowland they couldn't farm, so they built houses in it, and now it floods almost every year. So we hear from them quite a bit, and as we develop in this area, we're trying to make accommodations for a regional basin in this vicinity right here.
It is our intent at the next meeting to restart that conversation on that basin because of the development that's going on. So you'll see on the next agenda that conversation of how we're going to handle that stormwater and how we're going to maybe create a regional basin in that area.
And just so the council's aware, and it was on the agenda as a receive and file, there's 80 acres just north of this development, just north of Echo Hill, west of Alburnett, that we've received a preliminary plat for as well. So there's a lot of development out in this area, and we're going to see more and more of that occur. Just so 80 acres, I think the lot number is 181 lots, so that's a substantial population boost, and especially to this area. And it's going to require that the city start looking at other facilities out there. What are we doing with Alburnett Road? What are we doing with Echo Hill? There's not a lot of pedestrian access in these areas. As you noticed, within this plat, we're looking at trying to do a hybrid of the cross section along Alburnett Road to provide for an off-street trail, pedestrian way, and maintain an open waterway or a ditch into the roadway. So we're doing kind of a hybrid out in this area, and it requires a little more dedication to right-of-way, but that way we can accommodate the water and pedestrians. Currently, you couldn't walk from these subdivisions over to Echo Hill Road. We're also looking at a crossing at Echo Hill Road in this vicinity, so that if the kids need to go to Echo Hill, that they could get across, walk through the neighborhood. We did have a connection here, and there's a trail system. So we are looking at it from a pedestrian standpoint as well as development. Long-range plan is to do intersection improvements at Echo Hill and Alburnett. Dan, I don't know if you want to give any clues as to what that may possibly be, but...
I think they've probably seen it in my weekly report, but we are looking at evaluation of a roundabout at this location.
I thought it might be.
Not another roundabout.
We'll leave that up to you. Leave that up to you at the time we bring it forward. So.
Now that roundabout will go in before the stuff gets built around it, or? Nothing.
I will say I drive that intersection quite a bit, and it's getting close. This development's only going to exaggerate the need for something.
Tom, what is the elevation? Do you know just quickly off the top of your head what it is? That waterway there where the three come to one there back to Alburnett Road. Do you have any idea what the elevation change is there on that topographic?
Ooh, you're challenging my eyesight.
Well, is it 12 feet, 15 feet?
I think these are these 2-foot contours, Dan.
Okay. I was just curious. It was trivial.
Yeah. So from here to here, you got at least 10 lines. So yeah, it's probably, and that's not getting all the way to the low point. So,
okay.
Yeah, it's substantial.
Right. I knew it was fairly high. Thank you.
Tom, on your plat map, put it back up there. Where was the actual antenna site for?
I believe it was in this corner.
That's where I was thinking. You think Dustin would put up some kind of historical marker or something in there?
Yeah, that's what I've always understood, which is down here. You can see
the reason this is called Echo. Echo was one of the first satellites that the U.S. put up, and Collins at that time bounced the signal off of the satellite because they didn't have they couldn't put a radio in the satellite at the time, and so this was the first time that a signal was bounced off a satellite and received on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
So this is in the mid-50s that this was done. So I just wonder if there'd be a historical marker or something there that, so it wouldn't be.
Joe, you might want to talk to Dustin or have somebody
let's
talk to him.
Dustin.
We will have out front at the basin there may be a location for something there.
Yeah, maybe Rockwell would get involved in it too. That would be
Even if it was a plaque on a rock and a
Yeah.
bench, a seating area on the Jason.
Hey, can we move the Waldo's Rock over there?
Were there any other questions with regard
Any
to
questions for Tom? Okay.
We had a couple people at the planning commission meeting that were just there kind of wanting to know what's going on. So I suspect if we have folks at the meeting on Thursday, it'll be related to that subdivision to the south.
We did have a bigger conversation. Sorry, Tom, I'm going to jump in here again. We did have a bigger conversation about that entire corner and how that might develop out. You notice from between this development and North Echo Hill, there's nothing shown on that preliminary plat, but we have talked about that discussion and how we would handle that traffic accessing Echo Hill. So
there's one thing that we required, and we haven't really broached it with the council. When this development came in, when there's a split of those properties, we actually asked for a concept that illustrates how the remaining property could be developed in a reasonable and responsible manner, just to illustrate that to us that we know if someone buys this ground, we didn't paint ourselves into a corner. We know that there's a way that this can be developed, very similar to what is being proposed. It doesn't really tie them to it, but we just know that when we were approving the split and recommending it for approval by the council, that there's a long-range plan that has been identified. So, the next item starred is the public hearing regarding the proposed preliminary final site development plan for Hy-Vee. We're also looking at the final site development plan as well. There'll be a public hearing on this on Thursday. I'm assuming this is a highly anticipated and exciting project for the council. I know a lot of people have been talking about the Hy-Vee site for quite some time with regard to, it just seems like it's always packed. So Hy-Vee has come in and met with us, and they're proposing a complete remodel of the project. You've seen the staff report. There's a lot of investment going into this. There's 23,000 square foot addition to the building. They're reskinning the entire facade. There's a movement of the gas station here to the detention basin, and then the detention basin is going to be, or the parking lot will act as the detention, and it'll be an underground system, which is unique, I think, to only one other site. What's that? Home Depot in the area. So this is it's going to be an interesting project as it moves forward. So there's a number of phases. They're outlined in the staff report. So, if you have specific questions on it, we've been through it quite a bit. The neighbors did come with some concerns regarding some trash and cut through foot traffic in the area. I think Hy-Vee's done their best to kind of accommodate that, and you've seen that in the landscape plan within the project. They're showing the buffering that's proposed in the back, 8-foot fence, planting some trees, which will grow, obviously, a little bit taller, but they can't plant them immediately. I know I'm kind of running through this, but I figured you guys had read the report, and I don't really need to present it 100% to you. One thing that I will say is very unique about this project is the center median island within the parking lot. This is something we're going to be looking at requiring for big box stores, so a store over 60,000 square feet within our design standards that are our draft standards at this point, requires that there's one median where there is a walkable access to the store from the parking lot, not in a drive aisle. So if you have kids, babies, strollers, if you have your cart or your handicap, you can actually get out of your vehicle, go to a center island that's between parking, and walk to the front door, crossing one lane of traffic. So it's just a much more safe access to the front of the building. And you'll notice that there's medians at the end, which will have landscaping in them. That's the traffic control. If you've ever been to Walmart in Cedar Rapids, that parking lot is a nightmare because you can just drive anywhere you want. Let go of the wheel, close your eyes, drive in a circle. So anyway, that's just some of the highlights of it. Obviously, the staff report put together kind of goes into much greater detail. Pretty exciting project for the city, though.
Any neighborhood comments or?
There are at the planning commission meeting, several neighbors spoke. I believe the biggest concern was cut through traffic. There's a lot of kids and even adults that will cut through neighbors' yards from the neighborhood to the north, wander down through the back area and try to get to the back side of the store. I guess at some point there were a number of kids that used to cut through the neighborhood.
Pedestrian?
Yeah, pedestrian. And that tried to get, from the swim pool, they'll come down and try and get into the store from the backside instead of walking along. So there's fences. They're proposing more fencing. It's a steep slope. I don't know if you've ever just driven back there. It's nothing I think you'd really want to try and do, but apparently people do. And then there was a concern with garbage just blowing. That just happens naturally. You're going to have some litter in the area. Hy-Vee was at the meeting. They did indicate a process in a way to get a hold of the store manager, and that's probably the first step to getting that solution. There was concern also with some of the generators that are on the building, and the indication was that they wouldn't, like just from a noise perspective and them turning on. And there was an indication that the generators would not get any larger, so whatever noise is there now would not increase by any means. And it's a concern we've gotten over the years, just because it's a large commercial building. They do get early deliveries on the northeast side of the building, and there's the backup of the semis in the morning, so there's some noise there. But
do they have an outdoor cardboard crusher? Those things make a lot of noise.
I'm assuming they do, but I don't know. You may want to ask. I'm assuming they'll be here at the public hearing. That would be a good question for them.
Yeah.
With regard to that. Dave's in the audience. Did they have one, Dave? No. Okay. They do not have one.
Oh, okay.
Tom, is there any proposed changes on the frontage road that would lead over to the credit union? Obviously, that's a heavily traveled area now to the post office, coming off of 35th Street, where people cut through that parking lot to get back over to that service. Is there any proposed changes on that frontage road?
There are, and I guess I did fail to mention that. The credit union did come, and there's some concerns with the traffic generated with the moving of the C-store to this location. This is the frontage road that you're speaking of. So you'd come in, off Highway 151, you take a right into the convenience store. So this is the frontage road here, and you can see there's access in two places to the convenience store. Much of the concern that they had was in relationship to the canopy. Their building sets back fairly substantially from 151, so they have 2 rows of parking in front of their building. So line of sight's going to be a problem. I mean, it's hard to see that building once this is up. They weren't required to set that back, and Hy-Vee is certainly not violating any codes or requirements. So by doing what they're proposing to do, there will be a lot of traffic in here. I don't think there's any way around that. It's a convenience store. It's a 24-hour convenience store. So it's just that's just what you're going to see. It's adjacent to a 4-lane divided roadway.
No promise to fix the 10th Avenue congestion.
Yeah, I don't know if they've made any promises there.
That would be great.
Yeah, and that access will stay where it is. I don't think there's much change to that, actually.
The perforated parking lot that's going to have, where will the retention water go from that, or is it tied into our system?
It'll ultimately be tied into our system.
Okay.
It'll be held in tanks underground until such time as it's released to our system.
Okay.
They have to hold a certain amount of it for 24 hours for the water quality. The quantity has to be held just for a short period of time to meet the pre-development needs.
And then it automatically releases back out then?
Yeah, it just slowly releases out to
Okay.
the system.
Yeah, and I'm not positive, but I think that this area might be where that's located.
I think it is too.
On one of your drawings, it does show a compactor on there.
Yeah.
It shows two of them, in fact.
Yeah, it does have a compactor unit.
Anyway,
that's something I think would be a good question for them
Yeah.
to address.
I used to sit by one of those at Rockwell. I know
Oh.
what they...
Oh, now we get to the real story.
And that was a small one. So,
Yeah,
I mean,
and then
basically, it's a big hydraulic press.
yeah. This area here will be the new location for the garden center too. You know how it was always up in this vicinity. They're looking at putting that down there in the southeast or southeast west corner. Anyway, I think just to illustrate a little bit better, I know there's a larger drawing. You can see there's proposing some more landscaping here. You got the landscaped walking and then the median islands proposed. There'll be a little better directional traffic directing here as well. I think right now you can kind of just buzz around. So
There's currently no trees in the parking
very
lot,
little,
is there? Very little green.
very little. When they did the C-store in the corner, whenever that was, we were able to get additional landscaping in there, but you know, it's tough.
It's tough? What did you say?
Yeah, it was tough to get the landscaping and the parking requirements and the access and everything in there. They did do it, but
Will they stay open while they're doing this?
they had indicated they'd stay open. I think it was 2 hours or some very small period of time in which they change over some water lines. So it was very interesting. It's going to be a long project. I forget the exact time frame, but it's going to take a long time to do. You know, this is the red area is the expansion area, so you know they're going to be redoing the whole facility. But the idea would be to build that and then open it up.
Yeah. Is that going to be a restaurant? That's what I heard.
They'll have the market grill. Yep.
It'll be more of a, just rather than what they've got now.
Correct. Vernon Road. If you've been to the Mount Vernon Road, that'd probably be a good.
Boy, I've got one. Oh.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Okay.
That's all I had, unless there's other questions on other agenda items. Thanks you.
Yeah, the first item I wanted to discuss with the council is, I'm calling it a repurchase agreement, but essentially it actually would be a purchase agreement for ABC Connections Daycare with Ryan Companies. As the council probably knows, you might have seen the Iowa Realty signs on the building. It is being actively marketed for sale, and there's some concerns that if somebody comes in, as we've seen with other projects, if we end up needing that property later on and have to acquire it under the 6B process, we're a lot better to acquire it while it's vacant rather than when there's a going business concern in there, because then you don't run into relocation or anything else that you can run into if someone's occupied it. Ryan, it would be willing to go ahead and negotiate a purchase on the property now if the city were willing to execute an agreement with them that if the mixed-use project doesn't go through, that we would buy the property from them. And thinking that through, if the mixed-use project doesn't proceed, essentially what that means is that we're going back to just doing more of a straightforward renovation and expansion to the existing library. And there's no way to do that on that current site without losing some of the parking that they have, so we would need to have parking made up somewhere else anyway. It didn't seem like it was something that would harm the city to have an agreement in place for that. If the mixed-use project proceeds, then they've already got the property under control and it's ready to be dedicated to that project when it's ready to go. Otherwise, we end up with it at the point at which the mixed-use project doesn't go forward, and we're going to need it for the library project anyway.
I have a beyond brilliant idea. It's not just mine, it was mentioned, but if the city obtained that piece of ground, why not move the parking ramp from the 8th Avenue location and put it there, which would then make it available to the library, to uptown, to the park, to here, and put the apartments that are thought of for the top of the library, put those as planned.
You mean on the parking ramp?
On the parking ramp. But put the parking ramp here, which would make it more available to the city rather than, well.
Oh, that would be a possibility. I know with the mixed-use project, they are looking at all sorts of different parking options for the remainder of the site. But if we ended up with it because the mixed-use project didn't proceed, then that would certainly be an option for us to look at for additional parking over there. The topography is actually pretty similar because you've got a lot of elevation change between 6th and 5th Avenues like you do up there between the alley and the 8th Avenue side. So you probably could do at least a platform without having too much additional investment in it. But either way, we'd need to have control of the property. Just this way, if Ryan Companies is willing to buy it, then we can end up with it if the project on the library doesn't go forward, and we could have all those options on the table.
What is the asking price for it now?
It's listed at $367. And there wouldn't be anything on for Thursday or anything for the council to act on this because we'd need to see what are they buying it for, are they going to be asking for any carrying costs, and what those would amount to. But it would have to come back to council for approval.
A long time ago, like in the 70s, I said, let's buy that when it was for sale, when it was a boarding house. And everybody said, oh, poo-poo, it'll never happen. One of these days, people will start to listen to me.
Any other questions on that?
Questions? Okay.
Number 2 will be a resolution of intent directing staff to negotiate a TIF agreement with Scenic Development. Scenic, I had briefed the council, is looking at doing a senior housing complex off of Alburnett Road north of East Robbins Road. They're looking at a 120-unit complex with 3 different wings, basically an independent living wing, an assisted living wing, and then a skilled care wing that would all be put together. I don't know if I can pull it up or not. But I can give you some pictures of a similar project that they have done in Altoona. They do a nice quality and a nice level of development with these types of complexes. The company is, parent corporation is out of Iowa Falls, so they're an Iowa company.
Can you share with us why assistance is needed, to make the project work?
It's a large-scale project for the market, and because of the size of it, especially with the skilled wing, it takes a long time to get it full and get it leased up. And in taking a look at their pro forma, the main challenge that they have is they have to have a large amount of capital up front in order to get through that lease-up period. And so this would make sure that they could meet the debt coverage ratio at their bank during that lease-up period. Basically, it gives them some security to know that once they open this up, that they've got a phase-in period on their taxes so that they won't be incurring those expenses until the building is up. What I've looked at with them is doing a 10-year phase-in on the full imposition of taxes. So rather than something like a 5-year 100% abatement, the city would start to, and the school district would start to receive money earlier under the 10-year phase-down.
Questions? No?
All right.
Okay. Budget discussion?
Yep. Let me get this ready. Okay. First, before we launch into the budget, I just wanted to give the council a reminder about the CIP worksheets that were sent out. Today, we've only gotten responses back from 2 council members on that, so we need to get that information from as many of them as we can as soon as possible. Just to give you a little perspective, right now that means that only 2 council members are programming over $13 million worth of expenditures. So if you want to have a voice in that, you probably better get those filled out and sent in. So between the first draft and second draft budget, I'll just give you a briefing of of some of the overall changes that were made. One of the first tasks we did was to go through and reconcile all the transfers in and transfers out from all the funds. Also went through and reduced the department vehicle operating budgets where applicable because of the lower expected fuel prices. With the initial budget, we weren't sure how far that might extend into the next fiscal year, so we'd kept them the same as we used last year for the initial draft budget. Since it seems like the lower pricing is going to continue, I felt comfortable going ahead and reducing that amount, even if it only goes a couple of months into the next fiscal year budget and then it trended back upwards. We would still save enough in that next couple of months to make sure that the departments had adequate funds to be able to operate through the year. In a couple of cases, there were a few items of equipment that were set to be purchased in the general fund that actually needed to come out of the equipment reserve, so I moved those over. And then the final change that affected multiple budgets was going through and reconciling communications expenses. The finance department negotiated a new contract with Verizon for the city's cell phones that changed the way that we do our billing, and it really benefited a lot of departments on the regular monthly charges. So in some cases, those budgets were able to be backed off as well. So overall, the general fund now is coming in at $21.6 million of expenditures. That's about $227,000 below where it was at before. In addition to the general changes that affected a lot of budgets, we also went through and identified that there were still some duplicate expenses in the legislative budget and in the communications budget for the city manager. For example, newsletter expenses were still being reflected in both budgets. We were able to take those out of the legislative budget and make sure they were just reflected in mine. On the building department, their initial proposal had included adding a building inspector, and that wasn't included in the first draft budget. The first draft, I hadn't, though, gone through and reduced the other line items that would have affected. Things like training, licensing, those were all in the operating budget. I was able to back those down a little bit to accommodate the current staff. And then finally, as Wes noted earlier, we did move all of the hotel motel expenses out into their own separate fund. Overall, the budget is pretty well status quo from last year with a couple of exceptions. It proposes funding for the next round of firefighter hiring, which would be 3 new personnel starting in the middle of the fiscal year, starting on January 1st, 2017. 1 equipment operator in the parks that would start right away. As the council knows, we have been leaning heavily on the Parks Department with a lot of increased city facilities, taking on additional right-of-way. As the city grows and we build new roads and we extend out into new areas, we're just taking on more territory and more responsibility. And Mike's department is at the point where they really need an additional person to be able to handle that. Justifiably, it probably ought to be 2, but at this point, I didn't think that the budget could accommodate that, so I'm funding 1 in there. The library had given us 2 different proposals. One would be to add a full-time professional position, and the other one was to add 2 part-time positions. Again, looking at the budget, the 2 part-time positions are quite a bit more affordable because your cost of benefits is a lot less and the wage scale is a lot less than for full-time professional positions. So that would be what I would recommend. They're gearing up, and as you'll see later on the agenda, they've revamped all of their job descriptions, and they're starting to look at the staffing model that they will need for a new building to make sure that they've got the people on staff to provide the services that will be inside of the new facility. And that really is exclusive of what type of building is ultimately built. It's just they're going to be providing different services than they provide today. So a couple of other items that you'll see, and especially as you look through the parks budgets, you'll see areas where Mike's expenses were a little bit higher related to program offerings. But where they have expenses related to program offerings, there's also new revenues to offset that. So other than those changes, it does still include the second installment of $30,000 that would go towards the revolving loan fund that we've established through the East Central Iowa Council of Governments. We're anticipating doing that for one more year. That will give us a total fund of about $120,000 available to all businesses in the city. So between the first draft budget and the second draft, I was able to take the proposed property tax rate from $13.86 per thousand down to $13.82 per thousand. That comes out to about a 1.53% increase in dollars for a residential person with a $100,000 house, and about 1.73% for business. Why the difference? That's the difference that the rollback makes. The person with the house is paying taxes on 55% of their value. The person with the business is paying taxes on 90% of their value. So there's a proportional shift in who's paying for what. And that brings the general fund reserve in at 36.3%. Our standard is 35%. I did want to take a little time to kind of explain a little bit about that, because we are calculating it differently than we have in the past. Normally that 35% has been based on your total expenditures in the general fund. Now, one of the challenges with that is that as the general fund, as the city grows and the general fund grows with it, most of our growth is occurring on the property tax side. And we can't levy what we need for property taxes and then 35% more to go into the reserve funds. We're rate limited and we're also need limited on property taxes. We can't just levy additional taxes for purposes of building up a reserve fund. And so what that means is this property tax piece has been getting bigger as Marion has been getting bigger and our assessed valuations go up. The problem is that the other revenues coming into the general fund, things like your building permit fees, your franchise fees on cable, they're staying static. So property taxes are going like this as a percentage of the general fund. The piece that's making up the 35% is not getting bigger, and certainly not getting bigger at the same rate. So it gets more and more challenging every year to make sure that you can hit that 35% in the general fund. So what we did this year is calculate the 35% exclusive of transfers in and transfers out, meaning that money that gets transferred out, for example, from the general fund to the equipment reserve fund, you don't put 35% on top of that, because you're already taking money and putting it into a reserve fund. Then you'd want to put 35% on top of that to put into another reserve fund, and that doesn't really make sense. Additionally, a lot of what comes into the general fund is the property taxes for employee benefits. Now, like the regular general fund, the 810 levy, we can't say, okay, it costs, I'll just use an example, it costs $100,000 for benefits for these 5 employees. We can't levy $135,000 to make up that reserve requirement. So any of those transfers in and the transfers out were exempted from this year to count towards that. Now, in the eyes of groups like Moody's, they actually calculate it still differently than we do, because in their eyes, other funds, things like the equipment reserve fund, they count those towards our general fund reserve. You know, we have an account for it and we restrict the use of that to replacing equipment, but in their eyes, it's all part of the general fund reserve. So if you add those numbers in, we're well past the 35% that we would need to be. There's over $3 million in the equipment replacement fund, in addition to the 5.4 or so that we would have in the general fund reserve using this new method. Now, it does require a change to our finance policy to do that, but in my mind, it's more pure that way, because then we're actually counting what are our expenses from year to year, not our expenses plus then the transfers where we have to double count those dollars. So that's why I wanted to do a little more detail in that and kind of let you know how we're calculating that number for this budget. But I would anticipate that that would be the way that we would do it going forward. It does also show in the general fund the 27th payroll. Depending on the timing of when leap years falls, it's either every 7 years or every 11 years, or run into a fiscal year where you can have 27 payrolls instead of 26. For our purposes, that actually inflates the general fund by about $516,000 this year. Now, there's a transfer in from the Employee Benefits Fund. The Employee Benefits Fund we maintain to pay for things like employee payouts of accrued leave at retirement or separation, but it's also intended to be a reserve to pay for things like the 27th payroll. So we save money over time so it doesn't just hit us all in one fiscal year. Any questions on that? Clear as mud? The Equipment Reserve Fund, I've got included here as well. The Equipment Reserve, we're showing about $727,000 in revenues, $746,000 in expenses. That leaves us with an ending fund balance of $3.048 million. Examples of the items that will be bought this year, we've got funding allocated for 3 squad car replacements, a couple of unmarked cars, a canine vehicle. There'd be a new medic vehicle for the fire department, generator for Station 1. On Station 2, for our facilities, major maintenance can come out of this fund as well. So like Station 2 is going to need a roof, that can come out of this fund. New carpet, basically anything that a business would typically consider to be a depreciable asset is eligible to be placed in our equipment replacement fund. So when we build a new building, we do an analysis of it and then start putting money aside. Like for the example of City Hall. When City Hall was developed, we knew we were going to have to replace computer servers. So we figured out what we would need to replace them in 5 or 7 years and then started to set that money aside so that we'd have money in this fund to be able to do that.
That's what revenue is. The revenues are. It's the money you've budgeted in to go into that account, that fund this year.
And it does vary. We try to keep the amount that we are transferring over steady from year to year. But in any given year, you might spend $900,000 out of the equipment replacement fund or spend $400,000 out of the equipment replacement fund. It just depends on the rotation of what equipment needs to be replaced in that year. You know, if you've got a fire truck on there, you're going to end up with a pretty big number in that year. If you don't have a lot of rolling stock, then it's going to be a low year. But the whole idea here was before Jeff established the equipment replacement fund, the general fund was what was seeing those spikes from year to year as equipment wore out and needed to be replaced. It also meant that items were being replaced on a more regimented schedule.
So Lon, when Moody's takes a look at us on that, it's all transparent on our side because obviously we have it broken down into categories, but they're bulking it all back in on the Moody's side, correct?
Yeah, they'll take a look. When they look at our credit rating, they will bring this together. I mean, pretty much anything that we're transferring money out of from the general fund into a restricted reserve, they're going to count towards our general fund balance. That's why if you were to look at our credit rating report, you'd have a hard time reconciling what they're showing as our general reserves with what we show as general reserves because they're going to add this in there with it.
Okay, thank you.
So on the enterprise funds, a couple of tweaks to the road use side. One is I added a transfer into the employee benefits fund. That employee benefits fund pays for, as I used earlier example of payouts at retirement for employees from all departments. So the utility funds contribute money to it over time as well, just like the general fund will, to make sure that as they have retirements, that those can be paid out of there too. It does have one new equipment operator that would be proposed in there. We have a placeholder figure for the new public service facility. I think Ryan envisions that mainly for things like professional services, architectural, engineering, if we need to run utilities into the site, you know, the things that we would need to do to get the site ready and prep that for it. The public service facility, like a lot of the public service stuff, wouldn't hit just one fund. It's eligible to be paid for out of all the funds that fall in that department. So road use, sanitary sewer, all of those could end up paying for a portion, ultimately paying for a portion of that facility. The ending balance is about $2.88 million. It does draw down a little bit from the prior year, but the main reason that it's drawing down is because of that 27th payroll. The general fund, we pay the 27th payroll out of the employee benefits funds. In the enterprise funds, they carry their own cash reserves, so it counts against their cash reserves. And then the road use replacement, same thing as the general fund side. We transfer money over into a road use replacement fund to replace their rolling stock on an annual basis. We've got money budgeted in there for potential vehicle replacements as we get further down the road with the alternative fuels project. Doesn't necessarily mean that we would be buying all the equipment. When it comes time to do it, we'll certainly take a look at leasing options or other options for maybe looking at replacing the entire fleet on a set schedule rather than doing them one at a time. But in either case, this would be where those expenses would come from. Now, sanitary sewer was one I wanted to focus on a little bit because from my perspective, this year it's one of the trickiest ones to budget for because I can't make the assumption that our new agreement with Cedar Rapids is going to be signed before the fiscal year gets here. So right now the budget does still show a 6% increase in revenues along with the increased expenses from what we've been given from Cedar Rapids as our monthly cost for wastewater treatment services next year. So I'm assuming that agreement will still be in effect. If we get the new one signed, especially if we can get it signed before May, then we won't need to do that rate increase. Our regular monthly bill will go down quite a bit. I would not want to reduce rates at this point yet because one of the side effects of going to a flow-based agreement is that if we have extremely high flow months, we're going to have to pay for that. And the trade-off is our normal monthly fee is going to be lower than it would be under the current agreement, but we will need to maintain more in reserves to account for those high flow months.
What would need to happen for us to reduce rates?
Probably about 2 years in, once we've gotten the reserves built up and we've seen what our experience is, we'd be able to look at making some rate changes. Now, we do still anticipate bringing a rate change to the City Council. If you'll recall, one of the things that we've been trying to do is to equalize the rates on the residential side. If you live in a fourplex apartment that doesn't have individual meters, right now you're paying a lot less per month than someone who lives in a single-family home. And we're trying to change our rates so that we rely less on the month-to-month fixed fee and go more to the flow-based side. So we'll continue to reduce that monthly fixed rate and increase the flow-based rate. But it's not going to be necessarily an overall revenue increase. It's just going to change that payer mix on who's actually paying how much. Does that make sense? I think the last time we looked at it, like living in a fourplex, you would pay an average of about $18 a month versus a single-family home that was about $29 or $30, and we're trying to get those two equalized.
Lon, do you ever see the city of Cedar Rapids would go to a banding pricing structure
for
our outflow?
Potentially. I think we're going to a flow-based agreement right now. I think ultimately with the new regulations on wastewater treatment plants, where they are going to end up is they're going to build not only for flow but for concentrations and what you're actually sending down there for them to treat, which means that Marion, as a more heavily residential community, should be paying on a different band than Hiawatha, which has a higher concentration of commercial and industrial. That's really the flaw with the agreement that we've got in place right now, is that they're taking the aggregate of all the flows that are coming into their wastewater treatment plant and making the assumption that Marion's flow to them is based on our population. But we've been a lot more aggressive in controlling inflow and infiltration into our system than they have, so we're sending a lot less down there than they see from other areas around the community. Additionally, Cedar Rapids and Hiawatha are a lot more industrial and commercial than we are, so their concentrations are higher. So their cost of treatment average is going to be higher than it would be if we were being billed on the concentrations of what we were sending down to them.
Right.
But I would say, at such time as they get hit with having to do a phosphorus removal or something like that where their plant, where they've got to spend a lot of money, that's when they'll want to open those conversations. But going flow-based for us is really going to be a long-term advantage. On stormwater management, we are not proposing any rate changes in here, but this is one that we'll need to keep a close eye on. If you've been following the articles in the press at all about Cedar Rapids looking at their rate ordinance, when we adopted ours, we set ours up on an ERU system, meaning an equivalent residential unit. So we calculated the size of an average house, the amount of impervious surface that it had, and then we bill a certain amount based on that residential unit. When Cedar Rapids built theirs, they basically divided everything up according to size of property, irrespective of the amount of impervious surface or anything like that. What that does is it means that the residential pays more, but your biggest contributors pay less. They have rather swiftly come to the conclusion that that means that they are dramatically underfunding their stormwater utilities, so they're looking at now switching over to an ERU system that would really have a dramatic impact on the top of their rates. We actually put a cap on our top rates to make sure that we were competitive on a monthly basis with Cedar Rapids. So if they change that, we're not recommending council do anything with it, but that would be something that we could take a look at. If my memory serves me correctly, our top users, there's like 19 of them in town. It's not a very large number of customers that it would impact, but they are a significant portion of the stormwater that's generated in the city that we have to manage. And right now their rates have been artificially lowered because of that cap. Urban forest utility, again, we're not proposing any fee increase here. This will be the first full fiscal year where we've got full operation. Mike's got, a half of a year of the arborist tech position for this fiscal year, so next year it'll be reflected for the entire fiscal year. We do transfer $5,000 out of that fund over to road use. Ryan's department continues to have a role in storm debris management that involves a lot of tree debris, and so we have steadily reduced that over time. Ending balance is starting to get drawn down a little bit, but a lot of that's just reflective of the fact that we are now actually starting to use the reserve for what it was intended for, which is to do remediation for the emerald ash borer. On the solid waste side, we're proposing an increase to only the reduced rate fee. We'd be looking at wanting to bring that one up again over the next couple of years. It was the recommendation of the Public Service Commission that we bring that fee up to the point where we're covering our costs. A few years ago, it was as low as $7.50. It costs us about $10.40, between $10.30 and $10.40 to actually go to that house. So we're losing money on every one of those accounts, which means that all the full rate accounts are subsidizing them. The Public Service Commission really strongly recommended that we need to at least cover our costs on those accounts. So that's the only one that's showing a rate increase in the coming year. We do have additional revenue coming into that because as a growing community, every house that we build that gets occupied is another customer. So we do gain some of that over time. The enterprise funds, unlike the general fund, actually realize new revenue right away once these properties come online. Residential taxes, because of the 18-month wait, they'll build the house and we don't actually get any revenue off of it on the property tax side for about a year and a half. This is another one that we'll be taking a close look at because it's one that could benefit significantly from conversion over to compressed natural gas. I think they get a glowing average of about 2.8 miles per gallon right now, so they use a lot of fuel. Debt service, this is the fund that we use to pay our annual debt obligations. This year the split breaks out that there's $3.19 million in property taxes coming off of the debt service levy going to it, and $2.4 million coming in from the various TIF districts to pay for debt. And then there's about $170,000 actually total of other income coming in, but there's about $125,000 coming in from stormwater, about $24,000 from sanitary sewer for their pieces of loans that were taken out for stormwater and sanitary sewer activity in past years. Trust and agency, this is another one, as Wes referenced earlier, we split this one out into several different accounts. Prior to the new software, a lot of our restricted use funds like police forfeiture, the canine fund, Swamp Fox, any restricted grants that we might have gotten, like Giacoletto Foundation grants for the library or REAP grants, were funneled through here. This is the one where we've been reserving our property tax authority. As of this budget year, we're now down to about $486,000 in property taxing authority left. I've been reserving that because we'll need that for the third wave of firefighters when they come online, and then unfortunately, you can't operate a building for free, so when Station 3 comes online, there will be some operating costs associated with having that facility. So, as of right now, we've got about $486,000 left. Once we hit that, we will be capped on the amount that we can levy for property taxes, and at that point, the only new property taxes that you can get come from new growth. But this was intentional. It's something that we have set aside knowing that Station 3 was going to be coming. And the biggest amount that goes through there is the cost of employee benefits heading out to the general fund. And this year we've got the REAP grant that the Parks Department was successful in getting for Waldo's Rock Park will be receipted through here as well. One of the things I really like about the new software is that it now allows us to split out the TIF financing into separate districts, and you can really see how active each one is. For example, there's no active projects in the 29th Avenue district. Winslow Road has one active project, and that was it's a debt payment for the cost of the installation of Connection Avenue. The REC district, the Highway 13 North one, has one rebate in it, and that's going to Involta. Tower Terrace has ESCO, who's currently still getting a rebate, and then debt repayment for the cost of putting in that first stretch of Tower Terrace Road. So everything else is coming out of the biggest district we've got, and that's the Commerce Corridor District. And it's got a combination of rebates plus debt repayments. But overall, we're doing about $421,000 in rebates or other agreements, with $2.4 million going over to debt service. The Finance Department has to do a report every year in November that gets submitted to Lynn County, certifying what we need out of that district for the following year. So it's basically an in and out fund. Local option sales tax is now all broken out completely as its own fund. Unlike prior years, now you can actually see what the expenses are that are going towards internal engineering. One of the decisions that the council made was to use part of the local option sales tax, given the size and scale of the project, to hire additional staff in the engineering department rather than contracting a lot of that work out. So now you can see exactly what those expenses are going for. All the money is receipted into this fund, and then it transfers over to capital projects to actually do the projects. So we're projecting about $4.252 million in revenue and then $6.499 in expenses. The reason for the difference is the additional fund balance from the current fiscal year will be getting transferred over to capital projects at the same time. So there's some money that we're already carrying in there that would get transferred over. Quite a few different special funds that the city's had. The one I wanted to draw attention to was the health insurance fund, because it's pretty significant at about $2.9 million. If you look at a lot of cities that just pay for insurance premiums, you won't see that fund anywhere. But because we're self-insured up to $30,000 on claims, this is where we keep the money that we use to pay those claims. In addition to paying the claims, that also pays our contract with Wellmark for administration of our healthcare program. It also pays for well-being expenses and for our contracts for Affordable Health Care Act compliance. So like excuse me, the contract with Gallagher and Associates for assistance with that comes out of this fund as well. Because we are self-funded and you don't know exactly what your claims are going to do from year to year, we do carry a fairly healthy balance in here. We're projecting it to end at just under $2.16 million at the end of the fiscal year. That's actually, less than what the anticipated claims and administration costs would be throughout the year, though. But we try to keep that in about the $2 million range, just in case we have a bad claims year. And then Capital projects, wanted to do a little bit of a description on that. It's exactly what it sounds like. This is where we pay for all of our big infrastructure projects. We're showing $13.1 million in revenue, a combination of local option sales tax, interest, grant income, and then we are projecting a bond as part of the next normal bond cycle that the city does every other year that we would receipt in July or August at about $6.5 million. Showing $13.88 million in expenses, some Tower Terrace right-of-way acquisition, and the final budget will have the whole laundry list of all these projects in it, but it's quite a list. Along with Tower Terrace Road, you've got Albernet Road extension, Armar Drive, Fairview reconstruction, 6th Avenue extension, Lucor Road reconstruction, West 8th Avenue, the realignment of Winslow Road, then non-road projects like the Imagine Art Project and Waldo's Rock Park, functions and fitness. The one that I wanted to talk about a little bit is something that I think is a neat project that's really going to improve the service from the fire department, and it's called Rhodium. Essentially what this is a mobile system that they can install into the trucks that allows them to electronically store data and electronically manage the scene. For example, the department maintains a record for every building in the uptown so that they know where the water supplies are, where the doors are, where the staircases are, and they have a response plan for each of those. This will allow them to access all of that electronically for all of them from all of the vehicles. And I don't know, Chief, if you want to provide some more detail about what it's going to be able to do, but it's a pretty neat project.
Right now we have 3-ring binders of all the buildings in the city, and they're about that thick, riding in every truck. So by putting this electronically in one tablet, we'll have all the information we need about the entire city. So it'll really improve our capabilities and keep us safer. Also, it'll help us with communications with PD. We'll be able to talk over the tablets rather than through radio and things like that. So it'll really enhance our safety response.
Lon? This capital projects thing, now, something, public safety, I totally agree with. I think that is totally necessary. But a lot of that stuff, I don't think we should start on it until after the election, since we don't know what's going to happen. And everything that I'm reading is just not real positive.
Well, a lot of these are ones that are local option sales tax projects, so we either have the money or we're receiving the money for those projects right now. And then several of them are ones that we've gotten grants or that the money is already set up and obligated for. Of the ones that are on this list, Tower Terrace is the only one that has a federal funding component to it.
I'm still, the stuff I'm reading is just not real positive.
I can understand that perspective. From the way I look at things, if we grind everything in the community to a halt because we think something bad might happen, we'll never get anything done. So, a lot of these projects have been in development for 5 years or more, and we're getting ready to proceed with them. And they're in the CIP as projects for the year, already have dedicated funding, and they're ready to go.
Well, I just, once again, I'm kind of concerned about anything new starting. That's, if the thing is, well, go on.
Okay. The next thing I wanted to talk with you about is the getting to zero discussion. I had put quite a few items in my memo for the City Council. One of the things that past councils have always asked me to do is to put together a laundry list that if they wanted to do a $0 increase on the property taxes, what would that end up having to be? What kind of changes could you potentially make to the budget in order to be able to do that? Obviously, as you start looking down the list of the ones that I've provided, as primarily a service organization, especially on the general fund, which is where most of the property taxes go, the only way you can really affect that is you have to affect staffing. There are a couple of them on there about, for example, allocating costs for certain departments or for operating costs to the utilities. That doesn't really eliminate costs, it just moves them from one place to another, but you still have to pay the bill for it eventually. So I just wanted to see if you wanted to get to that. Last year, the property tax rate was $13.58 per thousand. Because the residential rollback went down a few points, the rate actually has to go up in order to collect the same dollar amount. So that's where the $13.61 comes from, is people are going to be paying taxes on less of the value of their home next year than they currently are. So to pay the same dollar amount, that rate has to go up. So that would be the target that would need to be met in order to do that. To get there, you'd have to take 0.208 off of the property tax rate in the draft budget in order to reach that number. So I wanted to see, did the council have any preferences on those? In the past, we've done a few things here and there, but not really done anything major. Certainly some of the stuff that's in there, like with the new firefighters, that's kind of a stranded investment that we're already committed towards. If we don't do it this fiscal year, then we're going to be doing it the next fiscal year in order to make sure that we're fully staffed when it's time to open up the stations. So every single one of those things, there are some operational considerations or other considerations with whether you would want to do them or not. But it's entirely up to council.
Questions? Comments?
I just haven't had time to look over, your revised budget yet, so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what we'll be looking for on Thursday is approval of what we've got in the draft budget for now, so that everything that can go into the public hearing notice is set. The council still has the opportunity to change the budget after the public hearing before final approval. So that won't actually take place until March 3rd. But I wanted to get you caught up to speed. You'll still have several weeks to go through it, look at it with a fine-tooth comb, ask any questions. The one thing that you can't do is after the publication goes in, you can't increase expenses and you cannot increase the property tax rate, but you are free to reduce either one of those. So here are the decision points, the items that we need input from the council on to make sure that everything is included in there. And I'm not looking for affirmative votes on it tonight, just consensus on whether or not you think that's something that should stay in the budget. The first one being the hiring of the new firefighters. Okay. How about the equipment operator in parks? Any dissension on or questions on that one?
What's causing the need?
Basically increased responsibility. Not only have we added more acreage that the parks is responsible for, we've also added more trails. It's just a consequence of growth of the community. We've got more territory that they have to cover. They have picked up some additional responsibilities that have been relieved from other departments for things that they have taken over, and it's an incremental change that happens over time. We just reach a point where we can no longer keep up with the existing personnel and then need to add one. It's one of the consequences of getting bigger as a community.
Okay.
Bigger is not better.
Okay. The next one would be the 2 part-time positions at the library.
Wasn't there a readjustment in those positions back when the ACA came in? And we moved some of those 2 part-time positions from full-time, correct? So are these 2 additional part-time to current staff today?
Yeah, we actually had a couple, I think it was, I can't remember if it was 4 or 6, that were classified as permanent part-time positions that were working enough hours that if we didn't curtail their hours, they would have qualified for benefits under the Affordable Care Act. So we pulled those hours back, and they lost some hours that they were working at that point that were made up by other staff. These two new positions, though, reflects partially a realignment with things that they're doing inside of the library. And as I said earlier, they're just starting to gear up towards getting ready for the new service offerings.
What's the impact on the budget for that? Sorry.
Yeah. Where are we? Let me find it.
Show from the meeting line at 4.12%.
What's that?
4.12% for the library.
Yeah, it's 0.11 is the impact on the property tax levy.
Oh, this was on their budget. It increased their budget by 4%.
Yep.
Lon, for clarification on that, when you say the new services, is that with the assumption of a new facility, or is this something that could be tabled and added later if we're going that direction?
It's something that could be added later if we're heading that direction, I think. What they've been trying to do is, especially with the new job descriptions, they'd really last been looked at on a holistic level 10 or 11 years ago, and people were doing things that weren't in job descriptions at all. They just needed to change to reflect what they're actually doing at the library. And so I think with this, what they're trying to do is to be more reflective of the actual services that they're providing and the programming that they're offering. They're doing a lot more programming for the community than they used to, and they're just seeing a need for more staff.
Thank you.
I would think with the library up, undecided right now, I think we ought to wait on it.
Okay.
Yep. Okay.
We've got the $30,000 in there for the next stage of doing the revolving loan fund.
Minor impact, right?
Hmm?
Minor impact.
It doesn't have a giant impact, but there's, one of the criticisms of the financing assistance that the city is able to offer is that if you're not making an improvement to your building that's creating new taxable value, under TIF, there really isn't anything that we can do for you. But there are a lot of projects out there where they might move into an existing building or move into a building that doesn't need renovations and may just need a little bit of extra help to get it started, whether it's that extra piece of equipment or something. And that's really what this is for. It's to help level that playing field for those businesses so that there's a resource for them outside of TIF.
It's a loan fund.
It is a loan, yep.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but this has played a huge impact on our economic side, correct?
Yes.
I mean, I see it on the other committees that I've been involved with, and I know that has been heavily utilized.
Yeah, and it's a competitive issue too, because Cedar Rapids has a couple of these in place. It's one of the big tools that they've been using to help revitalize Nubo in particular. And you can see, Nubo is what it is. I still maintain that it's a copy of what we've got in the uptown, but they have some tools down there that we don't. That's what they've been, though, trying to create, is that feeling that Marion's uptown always has had.
Very true.
Leave that in?
Yeah.
Okay. The other two are annual programs. The first one is pay for performance for non-represented employees. For those of you that are new to the council and aren't familiar with it, anybody who is not in a bargaining unit, the only way that they can receive any kind of a pay increase is they have to set out and achieve goals over the course of a fiscal year, and then their raise is based on how well they do in achieving those goals. If you're in a bargaining unit, they usually have a percentage increase that they qualify for, and then there will also be steps in their contracts for years of service. So the Department heads and a lot of the division heads and exempt employees, though, fall under the pay for performance side of things. It's a 0 to 6% that they can qualify for. In most functional terms, though, it's 0 to 5 to qualify for. Between the 5 and the 6, you have to achieve extraordinary marks on an evaluation.
So currently, right now, we have no CPI index, cost of living.
No.
This is the only.
It's all performance-based. And it's all in April of every year. So each fiscal year, although it shows up in full the next year, in the current next fiscal year, it only has the impact for the last quarter.
Now, I hate to be controversial. No, I don't. I love it. The question about vehicle compensation, I think really should be looked at, because as far as I understand, this is a benefit and it's not taxed as part of their salary, correct? Part of your salary, correct?
That's incorrect. It's taxed.
It is taxed?
It is taxed.
Okay, well, what I would also like to know is, for each person involved, what their base salary is, plus their automobile benefit, plus cell phone, plus insurance, the whole thing. So I see what their total package is, because I think it's considerably more than what comes out in the paper yearly as far as the salary is concerned. Because I get a lot of questions about this, and I can't answer them.
Well, the most expensive employee in the city is not me. He's sitting across from me.
Yes, he is.
It's that municipal police and fire retirement system.
Because you dress better than he does.
That information is all publicly available. As a matter of fact, every year we provide to the employees a total summary of what it costs to employ them to the city as a position, which includes their retirement, their insurance benefits, everything, so they can see what the total cost to maintain the position is.
I've never seen that. And I would like to see in black and white exactly what each department head gets yearly.
Yep. Yeah, we can get that together for you.
Would be nice. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. I think that pay for performance, I mean, I live by that working in the industry, and that's the fairest way to pay for the performance that people do, the job that they do. So, I mean, you live or die by that. If you aren't getting an increase, that says you're not doing something right. And so I think pay for performance is that's the most fair, the fairest way to do a salary.
I concur with you, Joe.
Yeah.
I concur with Joe, too.
What did you do last year?
Now back to that car allowance, though.
You're right, Joe. I just want to let everybody know.
Oh, it's a good thing we don't get a vote in that.
We should.
We should?
We should. Absolutely. We used to.
Oh, well, we don't.
That is incorrect. I don't know how many times that has come up, but it is simply not correct.
We wrote those things out. Oh, yes, we did.
You did for the city manager. It was
No,
never done.
We did for everybody because we had them in the. Yes, Harry.
Would you like me to have Jeff Schott come in and verify it? Because I've communicated with him about it. It did not happen. It never happened. City employees below the city manager have never been evaluated by city council members.
That is correct.
I disagree. I remember filling out forms.
Maybe it was advisory.
You're right to be wrong, Mary.
But I'm not, Harry. I'm not. In fact, to bring those several people into.
Let's have Jeff come in.
What's that?
Let's ask Jeff.
We did.
I've got an email from him. I asked him the last time it came up.
Okay, so
Early retirement is the next one. This is a program that we've offered, I think, for at least 11 years, maybe even have been longer than that. But it's something that's done on the basis of an evaluation of whether or not it makes sense financially for the city to offer that. You do an analysis. Most of the time, if people have a significant tenure with the city, they are at or near the top of their wage range. And if you bring somebody in that's new or lower, it's cheaper. But it has to make financial sense for the city to be able to do it. Whenever I've looked at it, on any given position, you can save anywhere between $25,000 and $40,000 if someone does do an early retirement. There's a trade-off because a lot of times you've got a lot of good institutional knowledge and working memory that's also walking out the door. So whoever comes in to replace them may not be as productive as the person that left, at least initially. But it's something that offers a cost savings for the city to be able to do that. Again, for the general fund side, and this is something, the reason why we maintain that employee benefits fund.
How does that impact us as far as any contributions into those programs? First of all, can that person, and this is just a question as a new council member, can that person come back into employment status with the city once they are retired?
They can come back in, but there has to be a period where they're off for purposes of IPERS, if they're an IPERS covered position.
And that's exactly what I'm getting at. So does that offset then our contributions into those? We all know kind of how the pension systems are working as far as early pensions, longevity of life, the outflow versus the inflow. Does that obviously impact the city's contribution levels?
I'm not in IPERS, so I don't profess to be an expert on it, but I believe once you've taken your retirement out of IPERS, you're no longer allowed to contribute back into the system. So even if they were to come back on, we wouldn't have that contribution that we would have to make toward that system.
If they leave
Oh, okay.
beyond temporary, then we'd have to pay.
Okay. Beth said that we would have to pay if they go beyond temporary.
Okay.
How regularly do we use early retirement benefit?
On average, I think we see between 3 and 4 people a year use it. We did do a temporary enhancement of it, I think, back in 2011, and we had 11 people take advantage of it at that point. But that was a year where we were really feeling the effects of the recession, and so we decided to offer an enhanced program for that fiscal year only to see if more people would be interested in it. Typically, though, the way it works is they can qualify for up to 2% of their annual salary per year of service, provided they've worked here for a minimum of 15 years. And then they can qualify for the equivalent of up to 2 years' worth of health insurance premiums. Now, if they just wanted to retire 4 years early and apply that to 50% of their health insurance costs over 4 years, they could choose to do that. But most of the time what we see is people that, are 2 to 3 years away from being Medicare eligible are the ones that are applying for it.
I still see it as a huge benefit to the city myself. It's an opportunity, options for not only the pre-retirees, but employees in their positions.
Anybody else have an opinion on that?
Well, if you look at salaries are by far the largest amount of money that the city has to pay out. And so, if you're, like Lon said, if someone wants to retire that's, a top earner, it may take 2 people to replace them, but they're still ahead almost.
Or 5 police officers.
You're saying they get like 2% of their salary for up to 2 years? Is that what you said?
No, it's 2% of their salary can come out either as a lump sum payment or a payment schedule that they agree with. They have to be with the city for a minimum of 15 years in order to be able to qualify. So you couldn't come in and work for the city for 3 years and qualify for early retirement. It was to make sure that there was a threshold.
So it's not like what Rockwell offered in December. They offered full salary for the years of service for months, a month for years of service, so.
Oh, okay.
So there's some people that work there, 40 years, they got almost the whole year, they'll get a salary. I think over 400 people took that. So that's a big chunk of money.
Yeah, we wouldn't get much done if 400 people took advantage of ours.
No.
Considering we've got 205 employees.
All I've got to say is I retired a year too early. I missed that.
Okay, so leave that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've got in here the property tax rate. Sorry. At 13.82107. If you are going to proceed with the elimination of those two positions for the library, that would take that down by 0.011 cents. That would be something that we would do after the public hearing, though. So you'd be looking at 0.81007.
Not a huge impact.
What's that, Nick?
Not a really huge impact, but.
Then on the other fund side, the reason I wanted to talk about all those other things first is because they all lead up to and lead into that property tax rate discussion. So I wanted to get those out of the way before we got here. On the other fund side, we do have the proposal for an additional equipment operator. Wanted to see if the council, make sure when the council wanted to proceed with that. Again, much like Mike's department, Ryan's department feels the impact of new roads and new territory quite keenly, especially with the new annexations that we've done. We have actually added a lot of territory to our responsibility, along with just what's being built from year to year.
I guess in my view, that's not something that's, up. We don't know where that's going. We know that we're adding more things and we're going to need more help. So I guess that's a go for me.
Okay. The next one is the sanitary sewer. As I said, that's that 6% revenue increase. Again, I use the caveat that that's only something that we have to implement if the new rate agreement doesn't get signed in a timely manner. So we'll keep the council updated on the progress of that, so you would know. We'd need to know by May in order to be able to have that rate increase programmed and ready to go for June. So it's going to be coming up.
But what Brian projected, though, was that actually went down. It was going down, wasn't it?
Yep.
That's what you had briefed us on?
It will, but as Lon alluded to, we have no idea what the rates are going to be next year.
Yeah.
So this is the projections they gave us this year, but they may change the whole flow-based formula next year. So you'd want a couple years to really examine the rates, and then you can take a look at it. Then you can make some significant adjustments the next year. So.
Okay.
The big concern I have is that we just, you can model it all you want, but all it takes is one really, really wet year and a whole bunch of high bills in order to burn through what you've got for reserves. So I think, we need to build up the reserves beyond what we have in there right now to make sure that we've got some extra cushion in case something like that were to happen. All it would take is another 2008 or something like that, and you could deplete what you've got in that fund in very short order.
Yeah, we can't get behind.
One other thing I'll point out, that's a 6% revenue increase. That does not mean a rate increase. And so there is some, like Lon talked about, differences in the rate structures. You will not see a substantial rate increase, though, for the consumers. There's a difference there.
Okay. Then the last two under the decision points would be the solid waste, and that's to add that 50 cents per month to the special reduced rate. The Public Service Commission can review it and recommend it, but they don't have the approving authority. The council has to make the actual approval of that.
And this is just bringing it up so we can cover our costs.
Right.
So we're not
Yeah, it needs to be in the 1050 range to cover the cost of just providing the basic service. And that, covering the cost of the basic service, you're actually only covering the cost to collect the solid waste. That's not covering your costs for things like operating the compost operation, lawn leaf pickup, the costs of operating the recycling drop-off site. That comes out of that margin between the 1050 and the 14 that the full rate payer is paying.
What's it at right now for the special rate?
$9. This would take it to $9.50.
So we're not even going to cover the cost.
No, it still wouldn't. But rather than try to jump it up all at once, we elected to try to phase it in over a period of a couple of years.
It helps a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
How long had we been at that $9 rate?
We made an adjustment last year to increase it. I guess what the board wanted to do is do a whole gradual increase to cover that cost. And so that's what they're recommending, rather than just taking that special rate away. Every year we'll make a gradual increase till we get to that point where we can cover our costs.
So our optimum rate would be 1030, 1040, somewhere in that ballpark.
Right now.
So,
yeah,
By the time we get there, probably the 1050. That's why I keep using that figure in a couple of years.
Right.
One thing that this does not include, and we talked about earlier, is that we will have some recycling fee increases realized from the solid waste agency. So that'll be on top of it.
And then the last one on the decision points here was the capital projects fund at $13.88 million. I gave you a partial listing of the projects that are going to be coming out of there, but some of the biggest ones would include the trunk sewer project, would be $2 million of that. There are several road projects in the $1 million to $1.4 million range, and then some other projects like the Imagine Art project is about $710,000 that would be coming out of there. We can give you the whole list, but overall it comes up to about $13.88 million. Now, in practice, we budget for all of those. Whether they all get going or not in the course of the whole fiscal year is another question. If something comes in and we get a really bad bid, we may elect to pull it off the table, do some redesign, and even rebid it the next year. Additionally, with what we've been doing the last couple of years with late start dates that allow people to start essentially in April of the next year, we may not see all of that expense booked in that same fiscal year. So that's a long-winded way of saying is that we budget for a high number, but typically we don't spend all that during the course of the fiscal year.
That's kind of where you went with the Art in the Alley project, wasn't it? You redid it to send it out farther.
Yeah, exactly. We've been having a lot more success with all of the road work out there now. You know, Cedar Rapids, with the amount of money and the amount of projects they were putting out, they put 50 projects out the door in 1 year and sucked up all the available contractors. So we started bidding projects where they could actually start the next calendar year to get decent bids on it, to jump the gun and start getting into their next construction season booking cycle. I don't know if you want to provide any more detail on that, Dan.
No, I just, we did 3 or 4 last year that way, and it really helped with our bids. We have several projects later in our work schedule that may get pushed to a spring letting of letting this year, but a spring start next year, just to help with that benefit. There's so much work going on, and prices are so high that given those mid-year lettings, we're almost better off to extend that start date to April of next year because it reduces the costs significantly.
Have you guys kept up on where asphalt is now versus doing all concrete? Are they where for lastability? Is that something you could do instead of concrete for a road, a new road?
Typically, what we've seen the last couple of years, that asphalt has been as the same or more than concrete for the same structural number of pavement. So
that's something that would save money on some of these projects then?
I think we've got a good test case coming up with the Lau Park South End project because that has the alternate in it for asphalt. So we'll actually have a live bid to see what's been happening with that pricing. Talking with a couple of businesses looking at doing projects in Marion, they've talked about that for parking lots, that asphalt actually might be getting more cost competitive again. But I think that'll be a good test case for us to see what it looks like.
Yeah, we've actually, that's what I was going to say, was we kind of monitor like parking lot projects and stuff, and everybody in the last year did concrete parking lots instead of asphalt. Now, what that'll do this year, I don't know, with crude being pretty low this year.
I know the foundation, you got to put a good foundation under it, but I just wondered, the asphalt's a little cheaper to lay, and, you know, if you have problems, you can basically redo it pretty easily.
Yeah, it has a recycle value of the top surface being, but when we put in asphalt, we're required to put in, to get the same structural number, you're required to put in more inches of asphalt than concrete, which gets that price closer together to give you that structural strength that's required.
What's the material that allows the water to?
Well, both of them make pervious pavement now. We call it Rice Krispie pavement. Both concrete and asphalt offer those alternatives. They're quite a bit more expensive than the standard product.
How would that work in the cold? You'd think in cold temperatures it'd be a cracked up mess.
We're seeing some use in the Midwest above the freezing level. You see a lot of it down south being used. If you put the right subbase in, allows it to drain sufficiently, you don't get the frost heave that requires it that causes it to break. So.
Can't imagine having water down inside that.
We try to make it move on to the storm system so it's out of the subgrade.
But that's something I wonder if, you know, maybe like Lon said, a test case to keep an eye on to see if that might save some money.
I think if I remember right, I think the Hiawatha City Hall has some pervious asphalt in their parking lot on the west side of the building.
I think you're right.
On their bottom entrance. The only other item I wanted to point out on the capital projects side is that this does also include funding for our annual programs. So when Dan talks about the HMA program or the sidewalk program or the sidewalk ramp reconstruction program, those come out of that $13.88 million as well. And we've got quite a few programs that qualify under there, you know, annual stormwater, annual sanitary sewer, that all are part of and parcel of that number.
Was that number, were we able to change that number after today?
Oh, yeah.
That one, okay.
Yep.
All right, I'm sorry, after the public hearing, I mean.
Yeah, again, it's a number that after the public hearing can go down. This one does vary quite a bit from year to year. A lot of it depends on how aggressive a contractor is and when they start billing you. You can have two contractors start on the same day, each one of them starting on $1 million project. One of them will have $400,000 billed out 2 months later, and the other one won't do that for 14 months, just depending on when they get the work done and when they bill you. So when we budget for this, it's kind of our best guess, but the actual amount spent throughout the fiscal year will vary quite a bit from that.
Because all of our projects go from fiscal to fiscal in one construction season, we have to try to balance that use. As Lon said, sometimes our asphalt program will go in the springtime and affect this budget, but a lot of times they won't come in until September and spend $1 million in asphalt after September, which pushes it into the next year.
Final considerations that I had for the council. I'm assuming that everybody's okay with putting the capital projects in there the way it is. Okay. There are two other proposals that we have that I wanted to put out there for you to consider. One is that for the first time we've gotten a request for funding from Diversity Focus. This is an organization that works in the entire Creative Corridor area, and they are an advocacy and public education and informational organization around diversity issues. They're trying to put together two major projects for the coming year. One is a training program for all participating government board and commission members about issues related to diversity, cultural sensitivity, and just overall cultural education. The other one is a program that they want to pilot in this area that would actually seek to recruit new residents to the area, and then once they get here, actually help them to be able to integrate into the community. They've made proposals to all the communities across the corridor, asking for $1 per capita for a contribution to get these programs off the ground. In Marion's case, they were using a figure at $37.5. I know it's not something the council has heard a lot about, but I wanted you to at least see and know that this was out there. I've got a couple of flyers on it that I can provide to you for consideration over the next couple of weeks. And then I just wanted to see if there was any interest in taking a look at that second parks equipment operator position. For the parks equipment operator, that makes about as I said, the ending cash balance was projected to come in at about 36.3%. If you funded the second parks equipment operator, it would come in at 35.8% of revenues or expenditures for the year. So I'm not asking for decisions on these two tonight, but just food for thought. Personally, on the diversity focus one, it's an interesting project that I think could provide a lot of benefit for Marion's boards and commissions. The amount I struggle with a bit because that's more than we provide for funding for the Economic Alliance or from general fund for the chamber and a lot of those other economic development organizations and groups that have a very targeted focus. So it's hard to reconcile something that's a little bit more esoteric for me than to put more funding to that than we do to some of those other groups that we get a direct benefit from.
Is that the going rate for the other communities then that are participating in that?
I haven't seen yet. I'm going to do some feelers to see how it's being received in the other communities and what they're looking at for funding, if any.
Does that fund a person, or is that
It funds the program. I think they'd be doing it with their existing staff.
Oh, okay. It's not a Marion staff.
They're headquartered in Cedar Rapids.
Yeah.
Yep. But I'll provide the flyers to the council so you can take a look at it. And Chad Simmons from Diversity Focus, I know, would be happy to visit with anybody about it that has questions.
I know on the budget, Mike had asked for two people. Is one going to be enough for you? Yeah. Put him on the
That's a
spot.
loaded question.
It goes back to, when we had our council work session associated with the budget, I had the two positions kind of described in two different ways. One associated with overall maintenance, a lot of those new initiatives that we have brought on in the last year or so. The other side of it and the other position was we do a lot of our own construction and reconstruction projects in-house associated with the Park and Rec Department. So one of those positions would be more based on the construction crew aspect of what we do. The other one focusing more on the maintenance side of things. Some of the other initiatives, coming forward with the Parks and Rec Department having more responsibility associated with our roadways, that type of item. Some of the initiatives in there were moving more towards a living roadway on some of those rural cross sections, and to do some of those activities, it does take skilled personnel to do that, which, currently we cannot do. We rely heavily on our seasonal employees, and we currently cannot do those type of activities with them. Another one of the things is that both those full-time employees cross over and do them, and that's our winter snow removal. Right now, we're staffed on the operations side with 7 full-time employees. That includes the supervisor and the operation manager to handle over 20 miles of city sidewalks, side paths, sidewalks, and trails, plus all of the city facilities that we maintain as far as parking lots and those sidewalks associated with those. We'll have the Art in the Alley project coming online. There will be winter maintenance associated with that. And that is all right now. That is done with our full-time staff. So that is actually a pretty limited staff for doing our snow removal operations right now also. Another item that has kind of come to light in the last week, too, is that right now our full-time seasonal employees work 18 months, and some of the restriction within the ACCA is that now we're only going to be able to work what we consider those full-time seasonals for a 6-month period. That impacts 10 employees that we have. So with the hours that they work, that equivalent is basically about five and a half full-time positions that will impact. So I'm still working through the scenarios on just how we address that and accommodate that, and I don't have that answer today, what we will do, but it is going to be a considerable impact to the department and how we operate moving forward.
Now, that was going to be one of the last things I mentioned, is the change in interpretation. When the Affordable Care Act came out, they specified restrictions on seasonal employees. Well, then there was delays on implementation, delays on definition of seasonal employees, but essentially what they've done is they've said that a seasonal employee, which means somebody that doesn't qualify for health insurance, is 6 months or less. Now, in our model for the way that Parks has worked, Mike has been bringing on seasonal people working an 8-month schedule, and sometimes a little bit beyond that if we have a long growing season, for years and years and years. Now, all of a sudden, all of those people, if we hire them and do business the way that we always have, are going to be eligible for health insurance. They have to be offered the same type of health insurance that everybody else is. So if one of those employees were to elect to sign up for family health insurance, that adds $16,000 to the price tag for that employee. So, I mean, if all of them did it, you could be looking at the equivalent of a full-time position overnight, just from everybody signing up for health insurance. We tried and looked to see what other alternatives there were out there to try to adapt to that, and it all comes down to the limitation on the number of hours that they work and the number of months that they can work through the course of a year. So the first kind of wave of impact that we saw with that, you referenced earlier, Randy, was when we had to reduce the hours of the permanent part-time staff over at the library. That affected 6 people across the city. Now we're looking at making changes to another positions. I'm sure that when it was originally conceived, they probably just didn't think through cities or how some of the organizations like us operate. From what I understand is they were really trying to make sure that educators couldn't be classified as seasonal employees, hence the 6 months, but we kind of ended up getting thrown under the bus with it. No pun intended.
Your Honor.
So,
if I could just say something, I don't want to interrupt, but the Zoning Board of Adjustment meets at 7. I wasn't going to say anything for 15 minutes, but it just, there's a crowd brewing, so just to let everybody know.
No, I'm actually done with that, so unless anybody has more questions on the budget.
So if you cut back those hours down to 6 months for the seasonal, does that offset the cost of another operator?
When you include the benefits associated with a full-time employee, I don't know that we're going to touch it with those. No, we'd still be a little short with a full-time employee as far as the numbers in the budget.
It would be close.
It would get us closer. I'd have to go back and run the numbers on that to see what it looks like and get some information from Lon to be able to do that.
The last 2 items that I've got under my agenda were number 9, a resolution approving the early retirement program option for 2016-17. We've got the documents together on that, so council could approve that. And then on the council photograph date, item number 14, I believe Mayor Abuasley is not going to be here on the 17th, and so that would leave March 3rd as being the only option of those dates where we can take the photo.
Who's going to be gone then?
Do we need him?
Yeah, you can Photoshop me in.
I'm kidding, just kidding. Lon, you were right about one thing about the Affordable Care Act. There was no thought in it.
There were a lot of unforeseen consequences, I'm afraid, with that.
So,
go ahead.
We should.
The 3rd.
Photos on the 3rd.
So 5 o'clock instead of 5:30.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Not this Saturday, but next Saturday, they're doing a weather spotters training at St. Mark's Church. You guys know about that? Yeah. Okay. So that's really, really interesting. the guys from the Quad Cities is doing that. And then I wanted to give just a brief account on the council meetings at the library. We had 5 people last Saturday.
Like more than that.
I mean, 5 that really get.
Talk to.
We had one couple that had just moved here in December, and they took every sheet of information that we had, and we had I thought it was very, very good. I mean, it's been very, very welcomed, I think.
I've received good feedback on that.
Yeah, and the library is definitely the place to be, because a lot of people go in and they kind of look at the sign, and then when they come back out, then they'll stop and ask questions then. So I think the library is a place to be doing this. So I think the first week we had like 10 or 14, 15. Yeah.
14, you told me.
Yeah, I had marked down 14 people. So I thought that's really, really good. So that brings up the point that I won't be here this Saturday.
Okay.
So
we'll staff it.
So
We'll make sure someone's there.
okay.
I'll go.
I'll join you. Okay? That it? Any other questions? Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.